Greetings all. Class is about to commence now, so hopefully, as I say, a few more people will join us shortly. Welcome if you join us on the Zoom platform, and welcome to those who are joining us live on Facebook as we bring to you Wu-Sabat Outformation classes in the UK and reflection and projection part 3. If you just joined us for the first time and you haven't had the opportunity to see parts 1 and 2 of this class, no problem. You can check us out on YouTube under All Eyes on Egypt, Midlands and the North if you just search under that title. And as I say, we try and make things as clear as we can as possible on the class for you, so you shouldn't feel like you've missed out on parts 1 and 2. But if there's anything that you don't understand or is confusing, please take the opportunity to ask questions. Okay. So let us move forward. Right, so what I'm going to do is do a quick test so I can just make sure that the sound and everything and the visuals are working as we expect. So just bear with me one moment. So I'm going to put up a poll on the screen, and it's just checking the sound, and the question is just asking, can you hear me over the music okay? Yeah. So I'm launching that poll now. So if you use your functionality, simply just click yes or no. Checking whether you can hear me over the background music is coming through clearly, or tones, and that you can hear me clearly as I'm speaking. Okay, excellent. So it seems there's no issues with the sound at this time. Okay. And just finally, are the visuals okay? So can you see the presentation screen? I'm just going to launch that poll now. So again, just yes or no. And just checking as well, if I move it back and forth, is it coming out to you clearly as well? Because that's another sort of issue, really. We're trying a new setup that makes it the transitions a little bit smoother, because you lose a bit of clarity over the internet. But just checking on whether that can be seen okay. All right, so it seems like 100% agreement that all can see the visuals okay. All right, so let's crack on. A lot to get through today. So this is part 3, and then 2 weeks' time we've got part 4, which I think we'll probably come to the end of reflection and projection. And so I've added another class in there, the Real Trinity, a very interesting class, but this is quite short, so we can add those two things or combine them together depending on how we get on. Okay. Let's move forward. My name is Nabab Kakni-Hess. I'm a student teacher of the master teacher, Dr. Malachi Z York Okran. And as I say, reflection and projection today, or Takuswu Tabrus Misfa in the sand. So that's what we're dealing with today. So it's going to be a short introduction, but we're first going to start with some positive energy. So in our culture as Musbatu or Sabaeans, we have an affirmation that we recite or chant to bring the remembrance of us, not only in connecting with what one would describe as existence, but also that our strength is in our unity with each other. So I'm just going to recite this in the Sabaic language, and then I'll translate into English. It's called Pa Takyud, the affirmation. Abdoy kale namazurat wu fakur amakasam un empa faut anuki jawef pa ashuk empa faut wu kale ashuk kawun jawef neya anuki kasam un empa faut wu pa faut kawun kasam un emneya anuki wahu ameh pa faut Wu pa fa'ud kawun wahu ameh naya. Nakuk kadur naju ameh kasam empa fa'ud. Wu khabub ameh mushahas Nakuk kadur kawan kaleh pafef nakuk dayur jawef pa fa'ud. Ameh waseh ameh dayarni kawun lakay bakoy jawef pa fa'ud. Anuki abed bi nafashni pa fa'ud kawun anuki pa fa'ud kadur nakuk kadur pa fa'ud amul nakuk amul. So let's go back and translate that into English. So pa takyud, the affirmation. I am in the divine love of the all expanding, and all divine love is in me. I am a part of the all expanding, and the all expanding is a part of me. I am one as the all expanding, and the all expanding is one as me. I can succeed as a part of the all expanding and fail as an individual person. I can be all that I want in the all expanding, as long as my want is to stay in the all expanding. I am never by myself. The all expanding is, I am. The all expanding can, I can. The all expanding does, I do. So that is the affirmation there. Say part of what we describe prayer, chanting, meditation, all of this framed around positive thinking. So this is how we start our sessions today, and generally speaking, chants done at 9, 3 and 9 within the daytime, or whenever, as I say, you feel the need to do so. So let's move in. So on the Zoom platform, we've got several different controls that you've got as attendees, as they classify you in the software. And basically, if your audio settings, if you need to adjust those here, are at the side of your panel, as you can see. So if you do have any audio problems or issues, that's where you can take a look and see how it's set up on the device that you're using. As I say, if you've got any kind of communication that's not questions, then select panelists and all participants, and so you can distribute sort of messages there. Obviously there's other people in the chat, or you can get messages to the facilitators. Could be a technical issue, whatever the issue is, or you want to give some feedback on what's taking place, either on the class, positive, or some things that we can improve upon, etc. Then you can put that in the chat option. If you have a question, then there's 2 ways that you can ask questions. We encourage people to ask questions, and this is a learning environment that we've set up for your benefit. And so the first one is just simply raise your hand. And when you do raise your hand, what will happen is that periodically I will ask the facilitator, Hara Habab, and he will basically look, and then what will happen is he will click a button and you'll receive a message on your screen saying that the host would like to unmute you. You simply agree to that and unmute yourself, and you can ask your question live to myself. If you've dialed in to the webinar today, then in order to unmute yourself, you basically press *6. If you want to raise your hand, you press *9. Yeah. Once you've finished asking your question, simply just mute back your phone. You need to make sure it stays muted. Otherwise, if you get background noise, it's going to interrupt the rest of the webinar. The other way then to ask questions is through the written question and answer section. So both again are kind of monitored by the facilitator today, Hara Habab, and so you can ask a written question. Again, periodically we'll ask, are there any questions? If you put a written question in, then Hara will basically ask that question on your behalf to myself. Obviously, if you've got some kind of follow-up or it doesn't make sense, then you need to make that known in the question and answer section again. So encourage all, because we are using a lot of different terminology. We're going through things sometimes fairly rapidly, and so we can't anticipate all different types of knowledge in the session today and on Facebook live. So as I say, by all means, feel free to ask questions and seek clarification so that things make sense to you. Okay, right. So moving forward then. Again, periodically to ensure that you're paying attention to what I'm saying on these classes today, we will have some poll questions. So generally speaking, obviously we've had a couple just to test the platform there, but these are questions basically to see one's level of understanding or whether you're sort of taking in what's being expressed in the class or by myself as a student teacher today. If it's, as I say, if you don't know the answer, then use your best guess. Encourage all to participate. Just to test your knowledge. There's no embarrassment. It's anonymous, so you're not keeping score, etc. But as I say, it's just to help your sort of recap and understanding. Obviously, if we see that a lot of people have got the question not quite right or wrong or whatever, then there's elements that we can go over. Right, okay, so we'll do as I say, a brief introduction. If you want more detail, usually when we do the part ones of this, we go into a lot more detail. So check out those classes on YouTube. You'll know more about who we are, etc. Just because I just need to get through a certain amount of information in today's class, I'm not going to go into loads of detail. If you joined us for the first time, by all means, check out part 1 and part 2, where we've gone more in depth into who we are as an organisation, so on and so forth. But let's say the person that we are representing today, and the doctrine of Wu-Sabat, which these classes are based and framed around, is called Dr Malachi Z York Okran. He was born on June 26th. 1945 in West Africa, a place called Takoradi in Ghana, and he was born to Mary Ba'h Yaanuwn York. So again, we mention this a lot of times. We were a matriarchal and are today coming back as the cycles come back around again, returning back to a matriarchal society. And so it's important that we acknowledge our own deities, as in our first deities as our mother and father. And this is facts, unprovable, not dealing stepping on anybody's particular religious belief, but these are facts. And so one of the things that we have to be clear about is who gave birth to the various different leaders or teachers that we're making reference to, and acknowledge and give credit, because genes are important in this day and time. I'm not talking about Levi's wranglers. I'm talking about our DNA and RNA, mitochondrial DNA as well, and what is our legacy, where are we coming from, what has given birth to us. And the only way that physical life naturally occurring can arise here on the planet Earth is through the womb of a woman, despite what other monotheistic books may say. Those are the rules of natural nature in this environment. So we give respect to, arguably, because we've had a lot of leaders and teachers in the past 6,000 years, and more importantly, the last 400, dealing with the last 4 generations, and we still find ourselves in the same situation, same dire conditions, and that we find ourselves in today. So being that those leaders and teachers in various different guises are part of a plan, let's say, to restore back 9 ether, 9 mind, 9 knowledge, and Wu-Sabat, and realign ourselves back with natural nature, then, let's say, who this woman is and who she gave birth to will become more significant as you understand what's taken place and what has been the part of, I use the word loosely, divine plan that's been enacted, as I say, following the spell that our people have been under. So this lady, Mary Ba'h Yaanuwn York, also known as Fatima, let's say, born March 10th, 1929, and then crossed over to become one of our Muslafu, or ancestors, helping us on the other side. So this is a picture of her in the garb of a clan mother. Yeah, so this is the royal garb that you see her in this guise. Yeah, a very stunning looking sacred feminine, as you can see. And his father was Al-Hadi Abdur Rahman Al-Mahdi, again of Sudanese birth, and so on the bloodline of the Sudanese royal family. As Satan is the grandson of Muhammad al-Mahdi of the Sudan. Again, his father was assassinated in 1970, unfortunately, but say that bloodline ties him, say, into the Mahdi. Again, his father was a significant individual, but as I say, it created several enemies, and unfortunately, when you're doing this type of work, it can bring a number of different issues. So both father and mother came together and gave birth to this individual, who we know, as I say, as Dr. Malachi KZ York. We've done some kind of extensive stuff on the Mahdi, so I won't go into that in too much detail. Suffice to say, this individual, Sudanese in origin, was from the Dongala tribe, which is Napata of ancient Egypt, or pre-dynastic ancient Egypt, how they classify it today. So is an ancient Egyptian in origin, as say, not Sudanese in origin, although he was hired by the Sudanese, say, to drive the British and the Turks out of Africa in a number of incursions. Yes, he was known as the Mahdi, which translates as the guide. 100 years after the Mahdi comes in the so-called Islamic tradition, is the Mujaddid, or the reformer, comes. And that's exactly 100 years afterwards, if you follow that particular tradition. The Islamic world today doesn't acknowledge or recognize this individual as the Mahdi because his freckles are too close. Yeah, he was a dark-skinned, black, woolly-haired individual, and because of their racist intent, they don't recognize that greatness. But more for them. You as individuals should learn about this particular man, and as I say, not that particularly the alignment with al-Islam, so to speak, but more of the fact of his alignment with natural nature and his use as a master spiritualist, a master Karama, understood how they defeated the British and the Turks using the power of natural nature against their enemies. Remember, the British at that time had cannons, machine guns, other different high technological weaponry, and the Mahdi was able to rally the Sudanese, called the Ansars at that time, simply with spears and stones, and they defeated, as I say, this army who was trying to, as I say, take over Africa, or certain elements of Africa at that time. And so confident was this individual in his spiritual powers that he would write to generals like General Pasha, you've heard me say this many times, but he would write in advance of the battle, telling these generals, European generals, basically to give up, to avoid bloodshed, to avoid people being, as I say, maimed, etc. In the battle, he would tell them in advance that they're going to lose. And just like the great Muhammad Ali, he was true to his word each and every time. But when you warn certain white people come across arrogance, they thought the man was crazy. Yeah, until they found out he wasn't crazy. You understand? After they were licking their wounds in defeat. So let's say the bloodline there, as you can see on both sides, is significant and interesting. And through that bloodline, this is Al-Sayyid al-Imam Isa al-Hadi al-Mahdi at age 25, and this is who, as I say, as part, or certainly in the first 30 years, as at age 25, he says he was housed by an Ifrit being referred to as El-Khadir, and on into, as I say, for the first 30 years, and the culmination of those teachings, and I say, this may sound crazy to those on the call hearing it for the first time, etc. But the point we make to the world, the point we make to others who may be listening, and we step through, we deal with factual information, we deal with spookism, etc. But you've never seen, as I say, an indigenous people around the world, original first world people, digging up the bones of their ancestors to find out who they are as a people. Yeah, you've not seen the Sands people do it. You've not seen the so-called American Indians, or they call Native Americans, doing it. You don't see the Aborigines doing it. Yeah, digging up the bones of their ancestors, studying them in labs and so on and so forth to find out who they are as a people. Yeah, under whatever archaeology, paleontology, so on and so forth. And I'm not knocking those particular branch of sciences. The point that I'm saying is that we have a different method for our race of how our story is renewed. And they well understand this because COINTELPRO, when you understand that COINTELPRO started with Marcus Garvey, it didn't start in the 60s, understood, with a man under various guises, but principally the person known as J. Edgar Hoover, who was the director at a certain point of the FBI. He, as I say, had a spiritual. COINTELPRO, or the FBI, is a political organization. Yes, a branch of the American government, yet it had a spiritual agenda. Yeah, COINTELPRO is a spiritual agenda. So yeah, the stopping or preventing of the rise of a black messiah. Understood. Yeah, and 1914, for those who know, is that year when they saw the Bukhasus, or the Caucasians, saw an extension of time after their 6,000 year rule from 376 BC was over, and they saw an extension of time in 1914. So various different things, or the catalyst or culmination, is that they're expecting, according to what they believe and teach, yes, they on, and they put, as I say, a political organization or a government organization with an agenda in power to stop that from taking place. Yeah, so whether we think it's strange, somebody out there, i.e. the US government, invested money, invested resources, invested time and effort to make sure that this renewal, or a certain individual being born who was going to restore or reconnect black people back to their ancestry, bring back their spiritual science, etc., they were preparing for that. Understood. So in our doctrine and in our culture, our ancestors, as I say, and as we step through this class, we'll make that even clearer for individuals, but our ancestors, remember, come in many different forms. So we are their children, and at one time, obviously, as we spoke about in the previous class, they are ether, but we are ether and matter, yeah, or matter and ether. We're a combination of the both. They, having no longer need for the physical body, have evolved past that particular stage, and therefore for us to ascend to higher states or higher levels of existence, yeah, in terms of what we're supposed to be becoming or what we are growing into, guidance is required. Now, you can have a disconnect between, as I say, mother and daughter, father and son, father and daughter, mother and son, in the same household, just with one generation difference. Yeah, not understanding each other, not connecting, not knowing how to talk to each other, depending on the relationship. So if you imagine, if there's hundreds of thousands of years of difference in terms of interaction, then the best way to understand a people is to be born amongst them. Live, grow, be amongst them, understood, but you're not them. Yeah, and in their biblical explanation, they say one like unto the Son of Man. Now, we're not a religious organization in that sense, but they said one like unto the Son of Man. That means that the person would appear human but not be. So the reason is, when you're looking at religious doctrines, so-called religious doctrines, and in our case, our way of life, it is designed for the mindset, for the people, for the day and time that we're in. Yeah, so the spiritual doctrine or science that's being applied is a medicine or cure for the minds of the people where they're at right now, because the genes have tumbled forward. Understood? So this is why, as I say, you have different interventions or incarnations that happen along the way to design an appropriate set of tools that are going to resolve or cure the problem. So at age 25, as the master teacher explains, he was housed by a being now named El Khadir, or the Green One, and they took us up to a certain point in time where they produced a stunning book referred to as the Holy Tablets, 19 chapters, which was the bridge between religion and reality. So it's us learning about those first 3 degrees, but also those 3 degrees have a higher aspect to them, which we'll touch upon in a slide in a second. But then it was now moving into the reality of who we are, and what nature's rules are, what subatomic particles, quantum physics, starting to go really into what Wu-Sabat and Musbatu or Sabaeans are interested in. We're not interested in cause and effect. We are interested in the cause that cause and effect. Back into the blackness. Where this society focuses on the light, which is really fire. So the Holy Tablets, or the 8th seal, some refer to it as, in the religious degrees, understood, was the bridge. And then that moved then to the master teacher talking about, as I say, in the personage of Malachi Z, York Okran, and the Ifrit being now known as Ba'h B'ah Yaanuwn would take the teachings on from the second half an hour, as we now step back into who we really are versus what we became, understood, stepping back into our ancient Tamarayan culture, Muhammadu, the Egyptian culture, more closely aligned with who we are after walking or mastering the religious degrees, understood, which would have been our baby studies in ancient Africa or ancient Egypt. In ancient Egypt, this vessel or being is referred to as Amun Nabab Raye Akhaktar, and that is a vehicle or a vessel that your ancestors used to speak to convey a certain type of information. They say a long walk on a short path, and so it's a vessel that our ancestors speak through to communicate certain information to us in this day and time, to enable our transformation from mortals back into deities again. We've been taught in this society that you are men and women, but we are, when they go and they see those various different statues in ancient Africa around the pyramids and other great monuments that we built on Afaf Raye Ka'ahu, understood, Africa, when they see those, they say those are Egyptian gods. But to you, when you're looking at them, those are your blood relatives, those are your ancestors. You have a blood, a DNA link to them. And we are their children in this day and time, referred to as descendants. So I say, I'm not going to go through this in loads of great detail today, because we've got a lot to get through. So I say, please refer to previous classes where we go through these slides in a lot more detail. Talking about the various different degrees, as I say, and seals, I say 1970 is considered to be, down to the year 2000, is considered to be the first half an hour, symbolic of 30 years or 30 minutes, some say. And then from 2000, that was also the end, or seemingly the end, of their 6,000 year rule, which is, say, they saw an extension from 1914 up to the year 2000. So their rule ended, and then now, and that was the ending of this, what they refer to as the moon cycle, and the incoming of the sun cycle, and the new information for this day and time. Excuse me. And that brought us, to say, in, as we step back into all roads of religion lead back to ancient Egypt, ancient Africa. And so this is where we walk back and start to learn our culture in more detail, so from the year 2000. And obviously the Holy Tablets was a book that was released in 1996, and then after that, from, say, it was a bridge between religion and reality, and then that first book opened our eyes into the the second half now was referred to as the Sacred Records of Atum Re, or the Black Book. On in after to the year 2000, the hereafter doctrines, the hereafter the devil's rule had ended, and that brought in now the actual facts, excuse me, actual facts, master secrets, and as I say, the Partarak, yeah, or the way. And those you remember in the Ashutat prayer, which was the prayer system, yep. In one of the lines in that prayer was, or the chants that the three priests used to say 19 times, it was Ashutat Pa Tarug Ila Pa Nitirat. Yeah? Ashutat Pa Tarug Ila Pa Nitirat. So, and Tarug, at that time, understood was, if memory serves me correctly, it was shown in verb form. And then when it manifested itself into book form, so we were calling for the way, we were calling for the guidance before, we were calling for the help, assistance, aid before we knew what it was or what it even existed. And then later down the line, that manifested itself into a physical book, a physical text, referring to as Partarak today, the way, yeah, which say 99 chapters, which conveys our culture and the way we should be doing things as children, as I say, of our ancestors, who the Egyptians referred to as the Parnatharu, yeah, but their proper name is Murzaku, yeah, or providers. So one of the things in uplifting or breaking the spell was our connection, certainly in this last 6,000 years, and certainly enforced through the kidnapping of our people in the 400-year bondage, and many different types of slavery that was taking place. Many don't talk about the Arab slave trades as well, yeah, where the monotheistic religions were imparted upon our people. One of the aspects of breaking the spell was who was sitting in the various different seats within the monotheistic texts referred to as the Torah of Mosesism or Judaism, the Bible of the Christians, and or Jesusism, some refer to it as, and the Quran or Mohammedism, as it's referred to as. That the different titles being used for what people know today as God were nothing more. When you go back into the Sumerian texts, Sumerian tablets, particularly Enuma Elish, Atra Hasis, Enuma Elish, Gilgamesh Epic, so on and so forth, we see that the same stories are there, but in this particular instance, individuals sitting in those seats have names and titles and make decisions and are warring and arguing against each other, so on and so forth. Nothing more than extraterrestrials, as we would use today in modern day language. When you talk about Inki and Enlil, as you can see even from this particular slide, yes, these are titles, like a general in an army, like a colonel, so on and so forth. Enki means ruler of the earth, Enlil means ruler of the skies, yeah. And so these are positions or titles, attributes being held. It's not the name of the individual who's sitting in the seat. You see Nudimud in brackets and Amir as what they describe as their personal names. And part of that uncovering that spell was to unravel that mystery, to find out, as I say, whether these so-called forces or sources that were taught to us in, let's say, in distress situations, understood, yeah, slavery was when we were in a distressed situation, yeah, when we were kidnapped. This is what was imparted upon us. And even in their book, in Revelation chapter 10 verse 7, they talk about, as I say, in the so-called future, that this mystery of God would be unraveled and finished, so in the future, so that you would know who is sitting in the seat. Yeah, we would unravel the so-called Wizard of Oz mystery of who is sitting and who has been controlling the very courses of our lives by way of our belief system, and having blind faith in these books, even though, as I say, who they were given to us by was our captives, or captors, I should say. Yeah, in a time of distress. And as I say, it leaves the question, the ontological question for us in Wu-Sabat was, can the slave and the slave master worship the same God? Yeah, and the answer is no. Because the slave who is under the captivity of the slave master must seek an alternative force and source of power to seek liberation. Yeah, because what people fail to recognize or understand is that that God or source of divine power helped the Mukasu, helped the Caucasians put the Nagaru or Nagarnadu Negroids into slavery. It helped them. Yeah, and if you look throughout the so-called books of monotheism, the books like the Bible, so on and so forth, you'll see that the activity of the Caucasian race today is the same strategy as is taught in the Bible. Depending on if you really want to open your mind and your eyes and really look at what's being expressed, there was people already in the land of Canaan before they got there. God told them to go and take the land of Canaan from the people that were there. It's those who are writing the book that told you that people in housing that land were bad people. Human beings occupy 1% of the planet Earth. So there's a lot of land to go around. So why didn't God just give them a land that nobody occupied? Now we see certain people under that ideology went and took land from people that was already living there, which has caused a number of different wars today. And you know what I'm talking about. So that strategy is the strategy that's being expressed in the Bible. And in the book called the Nine Ball, it said, if you understand the spirit forces that gave birth to the Bible and the Quran, you will understand the mind of the Caucasian race. So one of the things when you're dealing with spirituality, you have to understand whether a source or a force is for or against you. So you're asking those knowledge questions, who, what, where, why, when, how, but you also then have to ask, well, is that for or against me, that force or source of power, for or against me? And one of the things that we have had to set the record straight in Wu-Sabat is the reality that basically you cannot choose your religion or spiritual doctrine, despite how it's drilled to us here in the West. You can be Muslim, you can be Buddhism, you can deal with Confucianism. You can choose because of choice, but you cannot go against who you are according to natural nature, who and what your genes are designed to do, who and what gave birth to you. There are rules in nature, and when somebody tries to connect with a source or force of power that is not of their own bloodline and not of their own DNA, what happens? You get the type of situation that happens in a Pentecostal church, where people are connecting with sources and forces of power or ether levels that do not correlate with their DNA and their genes. And so a violent reaction takes place. But you say catching the Holy Ghost. Same thing happens if I'm in the UK and I want to cut my hair and I bring a set of clippers from the US. And even certain times you plug those clippers into a converter and you plug it in because the cycles are not quite aligned in terms of electricity. You plug it in, the clippers make a violent shaking noise. This is the same thing that we're dealing with. You cannot choose your religion. You can choose it. But it's not going to have the right effects that it's supposed to have because of your makeup, who you are spiritually, where the origin of your soul came from, where the origin of your spirit came from, so on and so forth, when you deal with the 9 principles of who you are. And they've kept this knowledge away from you. The ignorance, spiritual ignorance, and the racial blindness kept us under this spell of sleep because they want to direct your emotional energy into forces and sources that empower them and keep you suppressed. No other race on the planet worships a deity who is not in their image and after their likeness, except us. And when somebody is appointed or put in front of us to direct our energy, who is of our own kind, we are being taught to fight against it. If a group of people come together and try to do something for self and kind, they call them a cult. Yet every day when we live in this society, we are presented with Caucasian or European images for us to worship, and that's okay. Whether it's the money that we're holding in our pocket, understood, whether it's on the television, stars that we're supposed to worship, whether it's royalty that we're supposed to adhere to show that we're good citizens, so on and so forth. That's okay. But put a black man or black woman in front of us, that's a problem. People were complaining when Black Panther was shown that the actors, or the majority of the actors, were all black. People was complaining. But how many programs do we sit and watch where there's not even any black people in the thing at all? And we're supposed to accept it and call that entertainment. This is a society that we find ourselves living in. And it's no wonder it's difficult for us to optimize ourselves to reach perfection. And then I hear a lot of talk, everybody says, oh, nobody's perfect. But what are we here for? We're supposed to be striving to reach perfection. That's one of our purposes. So, let's move through. I'm going to start preaching. Now, so, as I say, the journey quest that we are on, is the difference between who a person is versus a what. And this is why one of the things is, as we start dealing with this class reflection and projection, we're going into part 3, you can start to see, and you have to ask yourself this question: why is it when I've started to, well, maybe some of you just started, but even people who have started on this journey of knowledge, when you start to read certain things, you start to get more knowledge and find out certain things, that you start to now input, whether that's study, reading, watching certain types of video, different types of media, etc. Why is it that the way you see things changes? Why is it that your brain, seemingly, when you know new words or certain things of that nature, is able to pick those things up, where in a previous time you didn't know those things? Some of you have even read certain books or whatever, and then when you've gone to re-watch movies that you watched before, you say, I don't remember that being in the movie. Certain words start to jump out at you at the screen, because your understanding has changed. And we're going to explore that, as I say, a little bit more as we were thinking about what we were dealing with in part 1 and 2, in terms of the fact that what we see externally is being generated from the inside out, not from the outside in. Yeah, that we are seeing inwardly, we're not seeing outwardly. Yeah, reflection in, and then we are projecting something outwardly, which we are then calling sight. We are projecting. Understood? So we're on a quest, and that quest is to find out, or to assess the fact, or to separate the fact that we are a who, not a what. Who we are versus a what. We've gone extensively, I say, in previous classes to give you examples of the difference between the two. The what is the decisions that we have taken in this society or accepted, and oftentimes those have been done for survival purposes. But it had nothing or took us away from who we are, or how we were created by our etheric on into our physical ancestry, and what we are and what we were supposed to be growing into in terms of the who by natural nature's design. And let's be honest, we don't know who we are. because no one ever taught us. And we've given ourselves names, as I say, over time for our cultural comfort. Call ourselves Africans and various different names that describe what we look like. But the question is, who are we? And who are you? And who are we that the world gives us so much trouble and hate because of who we are, not what we are? They prefer you to be a what? They prefer you to be in their image and after their likeness. They give you less problems. They have a problem when you go against that and you try to be who you are, which is anti that, and then we see a whole heap of problems. So our journey within all this noise that's taking place is to start on a quest. And the word quest, or that first step, is part of the word question, isn't it? And those first 9 steps for us as ontologists, yeah, we're seeking the essence of a thing. As factologists, we want to deal with factual information, we want to know things, yes, and numerologists. We're interested in the science of numbers, particularly in nature, looking at correlations, patterns of things, so on and so forth, and clues that our ancestors left behind and are within the system of natural nature that, as I say, helps us to reveal to us who and what we are, how we fit in, what's our purpose. Yes, 1 what, 2 where, 3 when, 4 why, 5 how, 6 who. Yeah, ends in W and starts in W. The 2 U's. Who you are according to nature, and then what you have become according to nature. Or some say who you are really, and then the you that you pretend to be. Yeah, there's a confusion between them. Yeah, one you present to the outside world, and then there's who you really are. So we're then seeking proof at 7. Proof gives us then seeking confirmation, and then once we have the confirmation, that should reveal what a thing is. So the reason why the facilitator Harem Habab said to you, yeah, pen and paper, is because you're seeking confirmation. It's not a belief session. And we had to get back to a point where the master had to teach us how to question things again, how to become part of the learning process. These are study books. No? The master teacher said, and therefore we accept. No, it's supposed to be a thing of, I put this out, now you need to go away and confirm for yourself that is factual. And it's exceptionally difficult to a people who only want to accept something if the white man confirms it. So if a black person tells them something, then what happens is when the white man confirms it, then it's true. The same white man is causing all the problems, or same white race is causing all the problems, because of the sources of knowledge and information, or how we've been drilled in that way. This is really important for us to understand. And whenever, as I say, one of our teachers or leaders rises up to, let's say, prominence where they can be heard, the sex or sixth force is always used to bring them down. There was an interview the other day, I think, with Joe Rogan and the filmmaker Oliver Stone, and he expressed that he had been trying to make a movie about Martin Luther King for a number of years, and in this movie was to reveal all of Martin Luther King's, I suppose, sexual exploits, or behind the scenes of who he really was. So this is a film he tried to get made. And what happens? So the legacy of Martin Luther King will slowly get torn down because they're going to be interested in what was taking place in Martin Luther King's bedroom and not what he was teaching. Now, if those are the rules that apply in society, that's how we deal with everything, then no problem, I don't have an issue. But let's look at that through right knowledge and sound right reasoning. Most people on the call who have children, or some of you have children, yeah, how many of you, if we're going to ask the question in reality, how many of you Bearing in mind that your children spend more of their waking hours when they're in school with teachers than they do with you at home. It would be fair enough to make that assumption, yeah? Unless you're homeschooling your children. Yes? How many of us as parents, yeah, so if let's say we hired a childminder, you would get a CV, you'd look at the person, you might want references, you might want different things or have to check the person because obviously they're in the care of your children, so on and so forth. How many of us honestly checked the qualifications of all of the teachers that were going to be interacting with our children to see that they were actually teachers? How many of us were interested in the bedroom activities of those teachers who were going to be teaching our children? Did we ask those questions? So why is it when it comes to black leaders, male and female, that basically, you understand, you can be brought down, understood, if you're a teacher, you're a leader, so on and so forth, by those bedroom experts? Where in actuality, it's none of our business, because we don't apply it to teachers in school or university, so on and so forth. We don't apply that test to most jobs. I know there's an advancement of LGBTQ, etc., but the reality of most situations, you don't need to know your sex in order, or what your preferences are in order for you to do a particular job. Yeah, in England, Philip Schofield showed you that. His sexual preference did not hinder him in any way, shape or form or fashion to becoming a top TV personality in the UK. So if he never revealed it, no one would be none the wiser or even care. They want to bring you down, they're going to bring your bedroom to the forefront. And the point is that we have to be of a mindset where if this is a strategy that's continually used, and they use it on their own people, not just our people, but we have to figure out a way in which we need to resolve this issue and be able to look at certain things factually as they are. Yeah, Martin Luther King's legacy is going to be brought down because of his bedroom antics. Malcolm X seemingly brought down the Nation of Islam because he was interested in the fact that Honorable Elijah Muhammad had 4 wives. So that led to the bringing down, you understand, part of the reasons why the bringing down of the Nation of Islam, and that's justified for that. An organization that was turning out over $70 million a year self-sufficiently at that time. So they're going to play all manner of games and strategies, etc., to stop you from becoming who and what you are today. And if it's Bible or Quranic and all these different types of morals that they can use and impart upon us, understood, then they're going to use those, as I say, because whenever a person mentions Jesus, whenever a person mentions Muhammad, whenever a person mentions God or Allah, or all these different types of terms or whatever the case may be, you expect the person to be perfect morally. And what happens is when you understand the different seats in the body, the carnal seat is the lower of the seats, and it's the one, as I say, it's the gonads, it's the ovaries. Yeah, so it's to do with the sex organs. So the moment you start to see something from a carnal perspective, it lowers the way you see things. Yeah, and how do you know there's a difference between the way in which we perceive certain things? A doctor, for example, can be examining a human being, male or female, whatever, and can examine those organs from a higher mindset. Yeah, if a male doctor's examining a woman's breasts, mammary glands, so on and so forth, he's not looking at those and thinking sexually. And there is a sacredness about that interaction between the two, and a certain trust that's expected from that profession. And so the person who's executing that gives off a certain energy, understood, that makes the person feel comfortable about it, because they're working from a higher perspective. But the same human being in the same body could lower that frequency and express it from a carnal point of view, and then the interaction could be received as sexual, even though it's not supposed to be, just by lowering it in the same human being. Now, we know, for example, our parents obviously had sexual relations in order for us to be here, in the majority of cases. But us looking at that interaction between our parents, it would lower the way we see them. So we don't focus our minds on that type of speculation out of respect. Look at that word respect, out of the way in which we see things from a certain perspective. And I'm saying this to say that it's very easy, as I say, for them in this society, you see how it's done, to bring down anybody using the sex or the sixth ether force, because of the games in which they play in this regard. So however the battles fought, and you see the way it's been fought over these years, and we threw up a few leaders there, 7 in particular on the previous slide, you see how that battle takes place to stop that information from coming to you. They're not interested in upholding the moral compass of the world. What they are interested in is stopping you from transforming, because they perceive your rise to be the end of their rule, end of their dominance, the end of them per se. And so we have to start making some choices from 2020, understood, to start getting back into our own stuff and leave his stuff alone, because it's been tainted. And you can't become the best of you emulating them. And if that sounds racist, well, it should do. It's right racism. Yeah, right racism, as I say, is the promotion of self and kind, the celebration of self and kind. Wrong racism is the suppression of another race to further your own race. So you have to get on your journey, on your job, so to speak, on your stuff, yeah, to become who you are, and you're going to have to fight for it. That's the reality. You're going to have to fight for it, because when we put up all of the people, just those 7 even on that particular list, what has been the result? One of them died penniless, another, 2 of them murdered, yeah, one now doing 135 years in prison. Yeah, you can see that 135. Remember I said that number. Let's see if it appears back again. 135 years. And all the transcripts in that case, the trial, everything's sealed. So no one can see the evidence. No one can see how the justice was arrived at. Only based on hearsay. This is the games they can play. So we have to get back to what, where, when, what, how, who, proof, confirm, and reveal. That's for everything that we do. You see now the gargantuan or giant challenge that is in each one of our lives to get back to a mindset like that our ancestors had. We didn't build pyramids on faith and belief. We have a mindset of a culture that deals with no belief. Yes, you see what work we've got to put in on a daily basis, every aspect of our life, piece by piece, building, shaping, cultivating, everything that we're doing to get back in alignment with who we're supposed to be. Now, for all of that, let's get to where we were from last month. Sorry, not trying to make you all sick. Let's just get back to where we were in part 1, as I say, 2, and now we're doing part 3. Ahmed, while I'm flicking through these, any questions? Oh, sorry, Hara M. Habab. Any questions?
No questions currently, Nababkak.
All right, so probably a longer intro than I intended, but here we go. So in so part 2, we were talking to you about this is an overview. So please go to YouTube and look at part 2 in more detail. We were talking about one of the 2 most powerful forces in the universe. Yeah, we touched upon it a little bit in the introduction. Mind, which is 9 in numerology, and 6 sex in numerology, and showing you that these 2 forces in nature, so some of the most powerful in the universe. Yeah, so 9 means or relates to mental power, and 6 sex relates to physical power. Understood? And we're going back to a time where mind is supposed to rule over the physical desires of the body. Understood? So sex as a force is not to do with lust and luster, which are different things associated maybe with that, but it's a force or a power in nature. You understand? And how we're structured and set up as human beings as a result of that. Yeah, almost and how we understand as well work and reward, and how things are supposed to work within the rules of nature and that setup. Yeah, so we're supposed to be becoming more mental in this day and time. Understood? And remember, as if for people who are considered maybe on the lowest rung of power or at the back of the race, we have to manage our sexual power, sexual energy. So for as much pleasure that we experience, we will experience the equal amount of pain. And so when you're on the come up, so to speak, you have to manage how much pleasure that we're taking in the sense it can't be, remember that song, I think it was in the 90s, Ghetto Heaven, because sex leads to what? Children. Children are, or can be, they're a great joy, pleasure, but they're also a burden. Understood? When you're on the come up. And so these things that we have to get back to and manage. We don't respect, in the monotheistic religion, it doesn't respect women. So we had to get back to a matriarchal society where we're respecting the rulership or leadership of women, even in our own households. Remember, sex originally, when men who were negative at one time, and then women who exhibited more agreeable forces, they would transform through the power of sex the male energy, which was negative, into positive energy. Women don't do that today in that regard, because our frequency, both male and female, is off. Women were, remember, supposed to use sex as a force to drive men to be successful. Yeah, because men know, and women know, if man has too much sex, he becomes lazy. Or if he gets it too easy, he becomes lazy. Understand? So that want or desire, the man desiring the sacred feminine in that regard, was to say, okay, you want to access the lotus of life, you want to come into heaven, understood? The garden he's doing. Yeah? That wall that we were speaking about the other day, it needs rebuilding, reshaping. Understand? You need to be on your job. You need to be out there doing such and such and such and such. Yeah, it was used as a way. Okay, yes, I'll do that. As a man, thought he's going to be on a promise, they say. Understood? So the energy was being utilized in a way where you have to work for it. Then you get the prize or the pleasure at the end. And isn't that the same way the brain works? If you think about it, when a person does physical exercise, etc., and some people can get a little bit addicted to that, or a lot of work, the brain releases what? Dopamine. It's a work, reward, setup and system. Understood? Yeah. As we start to understand these rules in nature and how this power works. So in the various different monotheistic religions, you were not given as actual facts is today, diagrams and things being expressed ontologically, diagrammatically, so that you can have you understand, 1,000 words can be expressed in a picture to make things or things that which are in this universal environment or teachings much more clear and much more understandable for us to see what's going on. But obviously you have to understand it's an expression of a principle or an idea that we have to kind of grasp and get our heads around. Yeah, so the two forces in nature, analysis we covered the last time. We also talked to you about descendants, ancestors, etheric ancestors. So, and in one of the previous classes, I think it's Rebirth of Black Egypt and the Matriarch. I'll look at that. We go into that in more detail about an incident that happened 9 billion years ago connected with the Sirius Osiris star constellation. Yeah, so more into that, go into that story. But the fact of the matter is, our ancestors, when we're talking about the Panatharu, let's be clear and crystal, absolutely, they are sons. Yeah, so you're looking at one of our ancestors, the sun, 93 million miles away from this planet. That is what we're talking about when we say Panatharu. Yeah, as one. Natharu is plural. Yeah, but that is an Athar. And as we expressed before, and it's in the book, Existence How and Why, yes, suns are planets with a brain and a blood system. So we're not talking about inanimate objects in nature. We're talking about a thinking, feeling individual gave birth, in this instance, to us. Yeah, so we have that is an etheric ancestor, etheric and energy ancestor, a higher ancestor. And then we have our Muslafu or Salafu, yeah, your 4 generations, which we covered in great detail in the last class. Yeah, your Salafu. So that's our physical ancestry. Yeah, and so, excuse me, look up that word "an" is really saying suncestors, understood? And like they give you one of the 3 great triads, isn't it? Solid, liquid, and gas. Yeah, the reason why we're referred to as descendants is because we descended down from that gaseous or energy state. Yeah, to manifest into the physical. Yeah, by way of the womb of our mother, being born out of triple darkness, the 3 trimesters of the woman carrying the child. Understood? So we were showing you this connection to how we got here and how we arrived, which is why we're imparting upon you this point that how we arrived here and how, which is one of our purposes, is to make our way back to the source from whence we came. That has a certain pathway, that has a certain pattern, that has a certain tonation, a sound connected to it, language, culture, a certain environment that optimizes that journey based on who we are. So you can't choose, because all did not arrive here by way of the same ancestral path. That's why we look different. That's why the DNA, or more importantly, the RNA, using the DNA, is expressing itself in a way that causes people on the planet to look different. And Caucasians are not white because of cold weather. This is one of those myths which are out there. It's a myth. They study certain life forms, understood, and the progression of life forms which are strong, and then have albinos, understood, and then have double recessive genes or traits, and look at what those animals look like. Shown many times in previous classes, the panther, or jaguar, or jaguar, another type of species. Yes, the real king of the jungle. Yeah, because lion is not the king of the jungle, because lions do not live in jungles. They live in plains and savannas. So the panther, which is the king of the jungle, understood, has spots. There just happens to be melanin in between those spots. Just like when you look at your hand, you can see a lot of spots. Yeah, if you look closely enough. But there's melanin in between those spots. So that would represent 9 when we were teaching you about the circle of space, matter, and time, isn't it? Over time and age, 9, or all gases in nature, all existing gases in nature, which represents life, becomes weak, becomes old, yeah, and dies. Yeah, i.e., kicks out less energy, less potent force. And so therefore, that produces what is called 6 or 6 ether. Now, the 6 ether version of that panther is a leopard. Yes, which has yellow fur seemingly and black dots or spots. And even when you look at the name of it, they thought it was a what? A combination of a lion and a panther combined together. Hence Leo, lion, and Pard, look it up, it means panther. Then over time and age, those genes become, that energy, becomes weaker, and it produces, you understand, a double recessive gene or genetic trait or strand or species. Yeah, a leopard, white fur, and in this case, in that instance, black dots and blue eyes. Just in one particular line. Is that a snow leopard? No, a snow leopard has grey fur. So these are the things that we have to understand. It's just that when it comes to human beings, we don't use the same terms, even though it's the same thing that's happening that we use for the animal race. And as we completely understand, is that genetic inferiority or weakness is considered or associated with that which is beauty or attractive within our society, and that which is genetically dominant or superior is considered to be ugly in this society. Hence why the white tiger or the white lion gets the most, you understand? It's one of the most popular attractions in a zoo. Even though if we were looking at it, if our brain was filled with actual facts and reason and proper information, we'd be looking at it for what it is. That's a defect in nature. Those are weak genes that we're looking at. But as we know, we've done a flip-flop. And this is why we're saying to you is that knowledge and information, can affect your perception and what you see, how you see the world. So the reality is, seeing, or this world or the physical plane that we're in, is an illusion. It's an illusion because it's based on our interpretation of the world, which means that what we know or how much knowledge we have in our brain, so on and so forth, or what we have acquired through various different means affects the way we see things. Hence why they say seeing is believing. And believing is acceptance of things that you don't know are true. So we have to start to understand this, because part of that spell, where there was an inner adverse force that has been working against us. You have what they refer to as visible adverse forces, and you have invisible adverse forces. The visible adverse forces sometimes say, or the majority of the time, can be fairly straightforward to see. Not all the time, but can be fairly straightforward to see. Ku Klux Klan, British National Party, and these types of, organizations, visible adverse forces are quite easy to see. Now, obviously, systemic racism, as they would have it today, can sometimes be more difficult for us to pinpoint, but we know what it is through our experiences, isn't it, when we experience certain activities moving through these society. The invisible adverse forces are more difficult to see, and this is something, as I say, which this whole section of class or series of classes is about, is because from within, based on the makeup of who we are, it has been difficult to see that something inside of us has been working against us. Now, it's from a movie, and so they say, keep your friends close and your enemies closer, correct? But what more closer can you get as if I mix in my genes into your physical structure and body? Then now I've got some force or source of power working within the person who has a different agenda than my agenda. A different agenda, certainly if they're from another race, understood, that might have a mindset to progress their race and work against you, your race, and it's inside of your genes. Hence why they make it a point for their own survival to mix in. But then what are the consequences of that? The long-term consequences. This is what we're exploring in part 2 of the impact of the exchange of those 30 U's. In those 30 U's. Of what is that, remember we talked about earlier, is that source or force of power for or against you? And what happens is, in monotheistic religion, we were told to jump over mum, dad, grandma, granddad, great-grandma, great-granddad, jump over all these people and go back to a man 1400 years ago called Muhammad. Jump back over all these people, go back to a person not proven yet to exist called Jesus. Jump back, you understand, 3,000 so much years to a man named Moses. Ignore everybody else in between. And in doing so, start to work with the irreality, the illusionary self, and not the reality of who and what we are. And who and what we have become because of some of that mixing in that's taking place. So we didn't keep proper records, or we saw no importance because of blind faith and blind belief of keeping proper records of who our ancestry was. To know why we act or react in certain situations because of the 30 personalities that we're managing. Now, we also covered, as say, the fact of that one of the triggers that can shape our images and the visions of what we see is the fact of our emotional reaction or response to certain things. So emotions, as say, trigger, excuse me, images or visions appearing. It affects what we see, or can be triggered by it. Over emotion or ecstasy can affect one's imagination. And when we understand, because we taught you about the 3-dimensional holographic brain and how the object beam in formulating of a hologram is the electromagnetic energy in the atmosphere that we are directing using our eyes, but the reference beam that we taught you about, the reference beam when you're dealing with the 3D holographic brain is the senses. And so how we store images, remember holographs or holograms, one of the reasons why they're used in natural nature is because of their ability to store information. Understand, the brain is an excellent example of information storage. Information storage. So unrivaled. So when we're starting to look at our ancestors and we think of technology, because when we say the word technology now, it has got a certain connotation to it, isn't it? Yeah, you think of computers, you think, I don't know, engineering, this and that, so on and so forth, rather than us thinking, because of who our ancestors are, thinking that nature is the highest form of technology. Yeah, and how a lot of things, even in this society, are that get replicated that we call technology are simply based on nature. Yeah, but they're externalized where we have those abilities and capabilities internally. So your brain is storing images by way of one's senses, and so a smell can trigger an image. because the information is being stored, as we touched upon in the last class, like undeveloped negatives in the subconscious. Understood? So you can see why ecstasy or us getting excited or over emotions can trigger certain imagery within the brain. Understood? Which one can interpret as being they're seeing something externally when the image is being generated internally. Now, rewiring the way, or reteaching in terms of your understanding of how the brain works and how your vision works, was important in us giving an example that how what one believes or what one accepts as truth and all these different types of things affects the way the body works physically. You understand? Because the word information, as you can see, is linked phonetically to being in a certain type of formation, where we gave you rods and cones and the correlation between them as it relates to sight, and the fact that we have estimated 120 plus million rods on the retina versus around 7 to 8 million cones. Cones enables us to see colors, enables us to see in the day or night, and rods enable us to see in darkness. So we have a significant, in the sun, over 90% of our retina is made up of rods, and a lesser percentage is made up of cones. But we think we can't see well in the dark because of the way we've been taught. Yes, and because a certain group of people had vitamin A deficiency and had difficulty in seeing in the dark, that then elicited fear of the dark, which, because they're controlling the stories, the media, what's been taught, and so on and so forth, we end up, and the children end up, because you can see it's in the atmosphere, children end up being afraid of the dark. And so much so that because of the need to then start fires called light at night, yes, if I then want to read in the night, I click on the light, or I light a lamp, i.e. a fire, to see in the dark. Yeah, because I was doing that to read, then light became associated with knowledge and not darkness. See, darkness is considered ignorance. Understood? But the majority of existence that we reside within is darkness. Yeah, 76% of existence is dark energy. 24% is dark matter. Within dark matter, 90% of it is dark, and everything, all the suns, planets, all moons, etc., etc., makes up 10% of that dark matter, or that physical universe. Everything. And we read out to you now in tablets the size of our universe. Yeah, which leads to words like infinite. Yeah, because of its vast size. It was the smallest of 7 of the innermost that's on this side of our black hole. Now, the fact of the matter is that, excuse me, we are born and we exist in darkness, and we are designed to see better in darkness. But somebody else has taught us that the light is good, enlightened, which that light they're talking about is really fire. Yeah, because there was no fluorescent or incandescent lighting in Europe before Thomas Edison and other names which they talk about or mention. And certainly not when the Bible and these books were written. So when they talk about light, they mean fire. So again, you can see how knowledge has an impact on what we see. Yeah, we've touched upon, say, the holographic brain, and we covered the circle of space, matter, and time in some detail, say, about how, say, from an ontological perspective, how we understand the evolution or growth within existence. Yeah, from 963. And then when we get to that lower part of the circle, so everything on the circle, let's just put that space matter and time up. Just bear with me 1 second. So everything above on the top half of the circle is alive, and everything on this lower half of the circle is dead. And how it takes 72 million years, understood, yeah, to go one revolution around this circle. We described to you a bit earlier about one set of species, and we gave you this example before, again, where things start off at their strongest point in nature. Yes, so that blackness represents it at its highest energy, understood? So it's packed full of energy at that point. But over time and age, it loses that energy and becomes what? A diamond. It's a piece of coal. It becomes a diamond. At its most dense form, one of the hardest or most dense items, yeah, minerals on the planet. And what? It is transparent. Yes, yeah, so over time and age, this is what happens. But then here now, i.e., yes, because the below this is numbers 2, you understand? 1 and then 0. So that is the lower side of the circle. You understood? All of that above circle, life and death, is still in the physical. This is where we're dealing with lower etheric energy or discarnate entities, which we become, understood? Yes? We pull that up, or pull that energy up into the physical world by way of our desires. Because when a person says, I wish, yeah, when a person says, I like and I imagine having things, which, let's be honest, this society has fed, yeah, your appetite for what we like, understood, what we should choose from in a society of multiple choices. And so I would like this, I want that, I want this car, I want that car, I wish for this, I wish for that. And that energy is not directed anywhere, it's open. And so when we open ourselves up, not realizing what our power is, we basically draw forth, yes, because when you think of a thing, you charge it with energy. Yeah, at that fourth plane of existence. And so it attracts things around it. This is why when they say to you, oh, you think of a business idea, or you want to change your life around, you think of a business idea. And if you're really focused in terms of concentration, that starts to then, you start meeting people. Hey, that person, I met a person who, let's say I want to start a car business. You then go and meet somebody who deals with cars. Or you meet somebody who, do you understand, is an expert, or set up their own car dealership or something of that nature. These things start to miraculously seem to happen. Well, no, it's if we understand what's taking place, is you charge that thought, and then you start now attracting things around it for it to eventually manifest itself into the physical. That is a natural law, as above, so below. That what happens is our concentrational power is weak. So we don't stay focused for that thing to manifest itself through the various different stages, or put enough work in to manifest it into the physical, which is something that we need to work on. The point is though, that we're open at that point. And so these lower forces seeking interaction with the physical world now also prick up their ears, you understand, to see, well, how can we meet that? How can we now in-house, yeah, to manifest ourselves to become what that is that person desires, to take advantage of 6 ether, which you understand, science of religion, yeah, the interference of the dead into the lives of the living, those forces that must subsist off of living things in order to survive. So it's their nature to subsist. And as you see here in the circle, the motion of 9 ether, or natural nature on the clock, seemingly, is anti-clockwise, because the sun, as you see, rises in the east and appears to go to the what? Set in the west. So real time, or the illusion of time at least, if it has to be given a direction, is moving in an anti-clockwise direction, not a clockwise direction. And so we can see here the motion of pulling up these adverse forces from the lower cipher or Lucifer, the lower circle, lower cipher or Lucifer, turns the circle, understood, yes, in the opposite direction, causing things to move towards decay as opposed to the progression of life or sustainment of life. Hence why everything in our society today, in the majority, leads us is more self-destructive in case, as opposed to dealing with self-preservation. And these are the rules in nature that we have to understand, what is being expressed and taught to us. But it's taken time to lift off the spell of religion to get us even to be interested in what needs to be expressed at that time. Wu-Sabat or Wu-Sabat was taught in the 60s. And you think about how long it's taken, because we're fragile. I'm not excluding myself from that conversation. We are fragile as human beings. And when you start to get into genetic conversations, you start to get into the real truth, real reality of who and what things are. And on that spiritual journey that we're all on, understood, you're going to hear things that are going to knock your confidence. You're going to hear things that are going to be, man, I've done that, in ignorance or whatever. There's no hope. YOLO, you only live once. You're back in the club. You know what I mean? You're taking this, taking that. Understood? Self-destruction, because we've had a little bit of a knock spiritually. Which is why I was making the point earlier about perfection. Perfection with the ION is a journey. And as I say, we may achieve greatness in our lifetime, but we know that if the kids are being born and they're raised right, then that journey of perfection or improvement doesn't stop. And that's the mindset we have to have as a people. Yes, there's a level of urgency we have, but we also have to think long term. Do the best in this lifetime, but the journey is going to continue with the next generation. And the next generation afterwards, and the next generation afterwards. At least 4 generations of us now receiving Wu-Sabat from 1970, at least 4 generations to correct the genetics and the genes. And that's if we put ourselves not only at the right knowledge level, by mastering what the master teacher is teaching, but also creating the right environment for those genetics and genes to flourish. So you can see, without the control or the knowledge or us being open, how those lower forces can start to manipulate things in the world, because we had no knowledge of it, we're ignorant of it, not paying attention to it. Every thought that's in our head, we think is ours. And we haven't had our protection in place by acknowledging and accepting our own ancestors, grandmother, grandfather, etc., etc., in the physical and out of the physical. So these are the things that we have to start to lock into. Certain principles are being taught, and get into it. It's got nothing to do with the Bible, insofar as and those things. It's not going to teach you those things, or the way it's being taught is being expressed in a way that makes it difficult for you to understand. So we were teaching you, as I say, about the circle of space, matter, and time. 3, let's say, sources of force of power or energy within existence. You cannot have one without the other. So you must have space, you have to have matter, and you have to have time within existence. And as I say, opposite here, 6 is opposite to 9, but you see it's a quarter way down in the circle. Opposite here to us is 3, the death of death. So above the circle is living, below the circle is, say, dead. And dead doesn't mean non-existence. Dead means low energy. is low energy. This is why when a person stops breathing, what happens to the body? Yeah, so they were like this in life, and then when they died and stopped breathing, yes, happened to the physical, there's a loss of energy, a loss of a certain type of power that was, as I say, energizing the physical body, i.e. the breath and the processing of that. Yeah, so it obviously contributed to us burning black. And we spoke to you also about the importance of that blackness, as I say, at the start of us being birthed, yeah, and born, yeah, or even before it, excuse me, in conception. Yeah, with black pigmented cells present at that time in the ectoderm, overstood, which has a direct effect on brain capacity, brain development, on spinal cord development, right there in the beginning. And as I say, we showed you the example here where we're born at our weakest point, but as we become stronger, overstood, yes, what happens? The hair starts to, yeah, nap up, as they say, yeah, become tighter in curls, which is a link to genetic strength, and the skin becomes, or the hue of the skin becomes darker. Yeah, because we have no need for the sun in that direct sense, because we live in water. So we're not processing the air in the same way, are we? So when we sit in the bath too long, what happens? Yeah, you become white for a few hours. You understand? Yeah. So we covered a number of different things, obviously, in part 2. And as I say, if you want to check that out and look at that on YouTube, just so we can get everybody on the same page for where we are. But primarily, it's about how and where we're directing our emotion energy. Understood? Yes? And this is what's important. Yeah, us taking back control again, yeah, by having the right type of outformation coming to in the form of information, and how we move through this environment on that basis. Okay, any questions before we do the first quiz?
No questions, Nabab Kak.
Okay, all right, now time for you all to work. Let's put it in. I did say, because we was able to do some quizzes at the last class, that we would give you an opportunity to reflect. So, okay, so some of you may, if you only joined us for the first time, want to know all the answers to these questions. Don't know all the answers to these questions. However, do your best. Your best. Okay, so I'm launching this now, and I'll give you, we'll say, let's say 5 minutes to answer these questions. Yeah, so we get 5 minutes. So question 1, what is the percentage of existence? What percentage of existence is dark matter, and what percentage is dark energy? The ka'a is the, so you need to choose one of the options there. What does the ka'a do? What does 9 represent as a major power in the universe? What does number 6 represent as a major power in the universe? What words are missing where the X's should be? That doesn't mean the X's there do not mean how many letters there is. It's just what words are there. That's a bit of a tricky one, but let's see if you can get that. What does takus mean? And what does tabruz mean? And then what does smat in the smat circle stand for? So nice and easy, nice and easy. Not testing, not too much. Okay, see how you get on. 5 minutes, 4 minutes left. So 1.5 minutes left. Not sure if this can be seen on Facebook. Probably people seeing it in the Zoom platform. But as I say, first question was, what percentage of existence is dark matter and what percentage is dark energy? The Ka'ah is the... what does the Ka'ah do? What does the number 9 represent as a major power in the universe? And what does number 6 represent as a major power in the universe? The missing words, where the X's should be. What does Takus mean? What does Tabruz mean? And then what does the SMAT in SMAT circle stand for? Okay, 30 seconds left. Okay, right, so let's end that. So that was 5 minutes. Okay, right, so let me share results there on the screen. Hopefully you can see those. Right, okay, so what was the percentage of dark matter and what percentage is dark energy? So let's look at that. 24%, 25%, so some here, 76%, 24%. So, yeah, I mean, that was a bit of a tricky question for you, actually. That was a bit of a trick question for you. Not tricky in the thing, you have to read carefully. So dark matter, excuse me, is 24%, isn't it? Yeah. And then dark energy makes up 76%. So to get that in the correct order, the top one here was the correct answer. Yeah. So 24%, 76% is the way they're worded. In terms of the Ka'ah, yeah, is the spirit you, the real you, the pretend you. So the correct answer, which nobody got the right answer, and there's ectoplasmic being. Yeah, so that's the correct answer from the 9 principles. What I might do is go back through the presentation. You can see I'm not telling lies. Okay, right. What does the Ka'ah do? So yeah, I think majority of people got that right. It connects your body to the mental reservoir by way of your mind. So that is the correct answer. So well done, all who got that. What does number 9 represent? It's a major power. Yes, mind. All the others are good answers, but mind is the correct answer for what we're talking about as it relates to this class. And then 6, conversely, 6 is a major power. Yes, dealing with sex. Yep. Here, what are the missing words where the X's should be? Okay, this is an interesting one. Okay, so yeah, on the ether side, so the 4th plane, that will be the mental plane, yeah, for 4. So on this side here, that is correct. So that's one of the answers there. It should be the mental plane. So that means the only other answer there can be the spark of life at 2. Yeah, so spark of life is formulated in correlation or at the plane of divine reality. Understood? And then projects down, and then the soul is formed at the 4th plane. I think there was a question in the last class that was dealing with that. All of that, remember, is an aspect of a person's mind or mental. Yes, understood? So just in terms of understanding that, Holy Tablets, chapter 7, tablet 4, if you want more information on that. What does Takus mean? That actually it should be reflection. Yep, so it should be reflection. And then obviously naturally 8 would mean Tabruz, means projection. And then excellent. The SMAT in SMAT circle, space, matter and time. So excellent. So yeah, just a few things there to warm up the mind. As I nothing but significantly wrong there. As I say, it's a couple of weeks since most of those answers were in the actual class. Right, okay, any questions before I move on?
No questions.
Okay, no written questions as well? You checking the written?
Oh, we have one behind a hidden window. Just a second. It says here, this is a question from Divine, I think it is. So when you say reflection and projection, is protection in the scroll? Protection is our ancestors, correct?
Good question. I'm coming on to that. So I'll go into that in more detail. Yes, in part, and also how one controls their thinking. Yeah, so there's a couple of things. And we're going into that in a lot of detail. Yeah, so protection is concentration as well. Yeah, so to answer the question, but we're going into that in some detail in this class. So you'll get some assurance of how to protect yourself. Or start to protect yourself from these inner adverse forces. So you should have got a good understanding at least of, as I say, we did go through this in some detail, I suppose in part 2, about the importance of genes and genetics. Yeah, so, and what takes place in terms of these 30 personalities, or what's referred to in the doctrine as the 30 U's. So in here, obviously, you are 30 or 1, depending on how you want to count it. Yeah, so you're number 1. So basically, say 30 personalities, you are included in the 30. If your parents are alive, then, excuse me, that number would become 28. So if these both on this tier were both alive, that would become 28 in terms of the influencing ancestors that can have an influence on your day-to-day decision making. These obviously can have an influence in the physical if you're in contact with them. You understand? And basically, if both of your grandparents were alive, do you understand? Then, or both sets of grandparents on both sides of the family were alive, then that would be, as I say, 24 influencing factors, i.e., these on these lower tiers. Basically, you're hearing their desires and thoughts in your just sort of daily movements, and where they potentially can have power is if you accept those desires as your own and you act upon them. So we gave you an example in the last class that you understand here, your great-great-grandfather, your great-grandfather, excuse me, here has, his favorite food was chicken wings. You understand? Yeah. And so he's got a desire for those, loves chicken wings in all their various different forms. Understood? But you at the top, the one driving the car, controlling things, you are vegetarian. Yes? And who just happens to go to a barbecue, chicken wings are burning on the fire, and one of those particles enters into your nose cavity. Yes? And you think, that don't smell too bad. You don't like meat. But what happens is that, remember, because obviously you are, let's say, we store information in a three-dimensional way, so as well as, let's say, visual, sound, pictures, we also store information emotionally. So this triggers a desire to have a taste of that. But it's not your thought because you're a vegetarian. That's clearly your conscious choice that you have made. That's clearly you. But it's their desire. So what happens is, it's just a flittering thought. You ignore it, you go away. Now, you're driving along, let's say through the power of advertising. Sorry if you've heard this many times before, but it's just to make this point clear, so we're all on the same page. You're driving along, and what happens is you see the KFC sign. And basically that it triggers that again. So last year, you know, boy, 20 years, you know what, and then what happens is the voice of justification starts coming in. Boy, you know what, I'm feeling very tired today, I had a hard day at work, you know what I mean? But chicken's got iron in it. It's got ironing, you know. Boy, you know, just a couple, you know what I mean, on this time, even though you're on your discipline. And so these thoughts start growing and you give it weight. So let's say you give it weight and you go into KFC and you order whatever, a 2-piece kernel, and you take 2 chicken wings. What happens is this individual's desires get bumped up. So I don't know, I can't see where they are on this list, but let's say they're at, I don't know, 3, sort of 7 here, isn't it? If they're at, excuse me, let's say they're at roughly about 9 on the list, yes, you just bump them up to 8. Yeah, and if you keep doing it, you bump them up again, you keep doing it, you bump them up again, you keep doing it. Basically, the person here can now start to be in the top seat and you become suppressed. Yeah, so certain people you can meet on a journey at a certain point in time. And I'm not talking about experience, I'm talking about the person has changed not because of experience or they're a different person now, whatever, because they're literally a different person. Meaning that we have allowed that person's desires, yeah, of the challenges of the physical body to express themselves to a point where they have gained a certain amount of power. They're now in the driver's seat, so to speak, and then we become, the real us is now suppressed in the midst of all this desires and thoughts. And this is because we had no concept. We understand, yes, we're made up of our mother and father, so on and so forth, but we lacked understanding of what that actually meant. Understood in terms of DNA and RNA. And as I say, when you exchange fluids, remember every one of your cells has a version, you understand, a full replicated version of you within the cell. Yeah, all your experiences, you know, who you've interacted with, so on and so forth, is contained within that cell. So if we exchange it with another human being, then we are taking on board their 30 personalities, as well as the people that they also interacted with within their 30. So as you can see, when we understand who we are, we're managing a complex set of activities, thoughts and desires, so on and so forth, just from internal projection. Understood? Yeah, which we are interpreting, as I say, as our own thoughts. And they can be triggered by a number of different things. We just gave one example there with the barbecue. Advertising, things that we're seeing on TV, you understand, music, so on and so forth. So it would take a certain amount of quiet and contemplation to understand who your voice is, but not only your voice, but who in this mix are for you and who in this mix are for themselves. Because when you think about those forces, and we expressed this last time, the desire, as I say, if you think about thirst as a desire, yeah, and if you went for a certain period of time without water, you can see how that builds and builds and builds and builds and builds. Yeah, it's a type of energy, obviously hormonally driven. You understand, inside the body, sends a certain message, but it builds, doesn't it? Yes, over time, it builds within the body. Imagine now you are only etheric, or you're only energy, and you cannot satisfy that desire because you don't have a carnal body to interact, you understand, with water to quench that thirst. What are the things that you would do to quench that thirst? Or what are the things that are force or source of power or spirit being, understood, who is there? You can't see it because your eyes are limited to a certain part of the electromagnetic spectrum. what would they do to get, or just to have that experience, just to drink again? Keeping it building. So we've seen the effects of people who are addicted to drugs, you understand? And that building and building up, what they're prepared to do, understood, morally and immorally or whatever, to satisfy certain habits. So let's not think that, you understand, these lower forces are not there waiting, let's say, to take advantage and do whatever, even if they are part of your own family, depending on how they were materially at the times, let's say, when these exchanges took place. Because some just want to see the best for you. Some want to just see the best for themselves. And you're contending with all of that. The important thing to note, though, is that you are in control by way of the decisions that you make and take. Yes, it's what you have to be conscious of. You have to be conscious of what is me, and then, well, that's clearly not me. That's something else. So what was he influenced by, so on and so forth. Yeah, that we are a conduit, let's say, that is manifesting or processing both etheric and as well as physical energy. And this is a reason why we didn't deal with zodiac signs as well, because of the complexity around these issues. You understand? So individual star signs, I'm Pisces, I'm this, I'm that. Not even getting into the whole calculator of how that works is off. The calendar, the way it works, is off, because every year the position of the planet, and how the sun moves through the constellations. Well, it's not moving, but the constellations are turning around the sun. It changes every year. Yeah, you could do simple piece of astronomy and go and research that yourself and look at when the sun in correlation is appearing to move through the various different constellations. It changes every year. Then birth of religion, actual fact, it teaches you or tells you that we did not use individual star signs. This is something that Alexander the Great Killer brought in. Yeah, the horoscopes, Horus scope in the skies. We used it in a tribal sense, understood? So how the tribe moved. Yes, and if you seek out a video called Cosmic Africa, a rare video, if you're still able to get it, but it shows you the Dogon tribe in Mali, and how the priests, the Dogon priests, basically used to be able to predict where certain people were going to pass in the tribe by looking at certain star constellations. So they were comparing modern astronomy to some of the ancient astronomy. So it was used, as say, for tribal directional purposes, not for individuals, because of the complexity around how that would work. So all of that, people say, yes, and these two people should connect because they're this particular star sign. It's all, we're going to say, it's when you analyze it with a certain level of reason, it's rubbish. You understand? It's what you believe it to be. That's why you're making the correlations and connections. Understood? Because, as I say, the other thing that people have to factor in is that your DNA is changing every day. Not even every day, every moment of the day. 24% of it is dynamic, constantly changing. The other 76% of our DNA, or chromosomes, I should say, or genomes, of the 24,000, so 24% of it are changing based on the environment. Somebody walks in the room and breathes, your DNA is altering as a result of that. The other 76% of those genomes are interacting with the morphogenetic field. So it's exchanging information out of the field. And this is a kind of central reservoir, a pool of data connected with the planet that holds shape information for all of the various different species on the planet Earth. You understand? Again, aligned, or supposed to be aligned specifically with our race. So we are feeding into the morphogenetic field our experience information, understood? Excuse me, that informs and can affect the way we change as a species. So it's going to affect everybody. Changes in the field, it doesn't just affect one or two individuals, it's going to affect everybody. Hence why people are still born with one thumb, four fingers, so on and so forth, because when stem cells are placed in a certain region within the body, for lack of a better word, the cell are downloading shape information to know what to grow into. The DNA and RNA does not store shape information. Saying morpho, shape, you're saying genetic obviously ties into genes. Understood? So these are the complexities around it. Now, let's just move forward to where we were. Okay, let's go back. So we understand that transfer took place by way of from our mother, through the placenta that was transferred to us as babies when we were in our bloodstream. So, excuse me, that initial ancestral transfer was done in the formulation of our blood because it was from our mother's blood. Then obviously, subsequently, after that, then what happens is that clearly our then interactions or exchanging of fluids can add more personalities to our bloodstream. And so this is why in a doctrine of the genetic kiss, the exchange of fluids can cause confusion. So it's not a case of, I think there's a lot of discussions taking place now about the kind of moral aspect of certain things and why women should, you know what I mean, this hot girl summer kind of activity and all this type of stuff, or whatever. And it's a very weird thing in society as well, very weird when you start to understand genes. So watching, Love Island, I think it was last year, whatever. Yes, I did watch Love Island, I got caught up. Now, but one of the guys on there, which was interesting, he said he had slept with over 1,000 women. And I think he wasn't even 26 years old. He slept with 1,000 women. So, and nobody batted their eyelid. You understand? If you marry if a man marries two wives in the society, they'll put him in prison. Yes? Which do you think? And the funny thing is, I'm not, I'm not moralizing it on this. What I'm saying is, which has the more adverse impact on the human race? So you're getting 1,000 genetic exchanges. To be at that level of proficiency, exchanging, I mean, let's put the emotional impact aside or whatever, because you could have to break a few hearts, I'm sure, in that exchange. You're exchanging without knowing, well, who you're exchanging fluids with, and then what things were being brought together in that exchange. So some people who were innocently, okay, I'll deal with you, now were not only getting the person of the 30 that they were dealing with, they're getting the history of all the other people that they were dealing with, certainly if it was in a short space of time. That's going to get added in terms of those combinations and correlations just from two people sharing a kiss. So you think about people innocently kissing, you understand, or going on a night out and people just kiss just for the sake of it because they had too much to drink. Now, in coronavirus time, people know better. But before coronavirus, then what was the thinking? There was no coronavirus, so you do what you want. Kiss 4 people in the club. Understand? So maybe on the female side, they're letting loose, having a good time. On the male side, it's a notch on the belt, isn't it? How many girls are kissed in the club? The rules of nature don't give a damn about how we morally think about it, whether it's morally accepted in society. The rules are the rules, and they are exhibited irrespective of the moral judgment of the situation. We gave you an example in a previous class. If a room was full up of gas in a nursery, yes, and somebody decided to light inadvertently light a lighter, what's going to happen? There's going to be an explosion. Nature is a reactive set of rules. It's a reactive state, which people have confused that reactive state with what they're calling God. There's no judgment in there or conscious thinking in that sense, because if the rules necessary to create fire are triggered, fire is going to be created. Even though we would say in that situation, we wouldn't want fire to be created in that situation, because there's kids in the room or so on and so forth. But nature doesn't work like that. The environment is the environment. The rules are the rules. So if somebody kisses somebody in love, or somebody kisses somebody and they're not in love, it doesn't make a difference. They're still exchanging genes. Which is why at one time, and you read in some of the old right knowledges, it said, yes, sex was sacred. At one time, isn't it? It was controlled. Like the animals, isn't it? It only happens at a certain season, in a certain period of time, and used for procreation, so on and so forth. But us having the ability to override all of that in that sense, but have a lack of knowledge or understanding of how those rules work, because the people in charge, the people in power, so on and so forth, benefit from the exchange of people who have stronger genes. Otherwise they'll die out. So these are the type of challenges as we start to understand who we are. Remember, we went through a process where Wu-Sabat was taught to us in the 60s. It was too heavy for us. People wanted to believe, they wanted to deal with the Abrahamic religions, and so we went under the 3 degrees. In 1993, the Right Knowledge series was introduced. So no more belief and blind faith or whatever. Right Knowledge is introduced. Let's see what you're going to do with this newfound power. You are gods. You are the deities, so on and so forth. Yeah? Let's see what you're going to do with this power. So people stop praying. They stop meditating, doing certain things. Until they were taught, until the master said, well, I never stop praying. So when you get your choices, do you align or do you go on a madness? When you get control. So, but having rules and then having no rules then brings you to a point of, well, actually, we need a few rules. But the difference is, when we're designing those rules, we understand the who, what, where, why, when, how of why they're being put in. And we understand if we are trying to stay in sync with our ancestors and in sync with our natural progressional pathway or natural ascension pathway as a life form or of an entity, overstood, then those rules are going to help keep us in sync with where we are traveling to or where we're progressing to keep us in sync with our ancestors, which is what Wu-Sabat is as a frequency. And so you're bringing in rules, but you're having understanding behind it. It's not thou shalt not kill, and then you see the Israelites going out killing people. So why was that rule brought in? Why was circumcision brought in? Go and ask those who follow these particular monotheistic religions. Well, why was that brought in? Why did he bring that in? Yeah, Cain kills his brother in a seemingly act and then gets sent to go and live in the land of Nod. Another place in the Bible, a man let his semen splash on the floor, do a draw technique, killed instantly. So why are these rules brought in? We follow them, I follow the 10 Commandments, even though it's 613, but as I say, who brought them in? Why? Who do they apply to? Who do they not apply to? How does it connect? Because there's loads of contradictions in there. Thou shalt not lie, but then Jesus lied. You understand? So, you mean, you shouldn't covet. Thou shalt not covet, and other one's why, but then God's saying he's jealous. So isn't coveting jealousy? So there's a whole heap of contradictions. So we went from a point of rules, no understanding who we are. We didn't want to accept that. We wanted rules. They'd have no rules, and then now at a state where, okay, you should understand with part of you should understand, well, why is that in place? Why are we doing that? Then why should you understand? Why is it that you don't want the children to be having sexual relations too early, or not even sexual relations? You want them to be married at a certain age. We can get back to that point. Yeah, that children are raised a certain way, a certain level, and when they're ready to have sexual relations, they should be married in that context. We never get to that point. It seems a bit of an impossibility in this day and time. And there's a whole ritual around marriage, or mara, which means what? Beloved age, the mara age, or going back to that type of setup, because you're taking back control of that sexual power, not moralizing in that sense, but in that same way, but you're setting in rules to produce the best or optimum type of children in the environments that we find ourselves in, i.e. star children. And if one generation makes that change, then the next generation makes a change, and by the time we get to 4 generations, all impurities are going to come out, and then a genetic shift happens. And we want that shift to be an ascension shift, not a regression shift. So we have to start making our own rules, and those rules are oftentimes contrary to that which is taking place within modern society, because we know they're on a self-destruction pathway, or certainly want to see us destroyed so they can live off the back of our emotional and genetic energy and strength. So it creates a lot of complications, and this is why I was saying earlier, if you think about how long it's taken us to get to this point in Wu-Sabat, is because, or it being spoon-fed in a way, is because of our fragility of our ego to take on so much truth in this context. Because there's certain decisions that we made in ignorance, and the subsequent consequences of it. But it is what it is. There's nothing you can do to change it. It is what it is. You can just obviously all we can do is try to live our lives in a progressive way, understood, moving forward. And if we trip and we make mistakes, then so be it. Obviously, it's about how we move forward and progress. And that's how we've got to move. Doesn't mean dash the journey away, you know what I mean? Or as I say, you only live once mentality. Oh, nothing matters. You could be hit by a car tomorrow. And people stop their ascension journey because of this kind of fatalistic thinking. You understand? So what we have to understand and take responsibility for is that, yes, we made certain decisions in ignorance or even knowing. You understand? It is what it is. You know, those desires that are sitting there in those 30, they're not easy to control. Even incarnated masters, yeah, some who may have trillions of years worth of existence and lifetimes, do not like to manifest into the physical form, because you can get caught up. This is why when you understand the doctrine, the Panatharu don't even manifest below the 4th plane of existence, which is the mental plane. They're not trying to find themselves in the spiritual, the plane of force, or the physical plane. We'll meet you guys at 4, the 4th plane. You transform yourself, work up your strength and your abilities, and get yourself up to level 4, then we can have a conversation. Until then, you did the purity of your salaf for your ancestors. They're not trying to come down into 4. So it's a challenge. But a challenge that we chose. Yeah? Because we wanted to be an eye and not within all. Yes? Every person chose that. Who's here? The same way, when you get to a certain age, you're living in your parents' house. Yes? Everything was cool. Bills paid in certain instances. Yes? Food cooked. Yeah? But you decide, you know what I mean? That, boy, coming back at 9 p.m. is not working for me, because my friends are out at 10:30, 11, 12, 1 a.m. in the morning. Yes? And so your parents say, well, these are our rules. If you want to live here, you got to live by our rules. And as it continues and progresses or whatever, arguments start taking place because your ego, your godship starts to assert itself. You say, well, sure. I'm my own person. I can do my own thing. I'm moving out. And then when you move out and you got your own place, if you're lucky enough even to get that in these days and times, you got your own place, yeah, you find out certain bills that you had no concept of before start to land. And you see how that independence has a lot of hardships connected with it. Yeah, and what sacrifices that you have to make in regard to that. And this is what we find ourselves here, born as human beings, individuals in this day and time, disconnected to natural nature, and how we now have to work to reconnect and realign ourselves back again. So, reflection and projection. Yeah. So, let's say. So when we're talking about Takus Wu-Tabruz, and then you've got another concept in Wu-Sabat referred to as the mind's eye. So it's just to bring some clarity and difference between the two. Essentially, they are very similar things, but they are talking about two slightly different things. So when we talk about Takus and Tabruz projection, we are talking about those 30 ancestors or more, understood, and their ability to manipulate what a person sees or what is projected outside of them, and can deceive the individual into what they are seeing for their own ends, yeah, specifically. And those projections can be manifest itself in different ways, understood, yes? When we're talking about mind's eye, again, that is one of the ways in which those projection can manifest itself. But it's also understanding that human beings, as I say, are creative and very imaginative. I think I'm not even saying that right, but you know what I'm trying to say. Yeah, beings, and therefore the mind's eye is cautioning. Yeah, it's cautioning us as individuals, understood, about how certain things that we see can appear real but are not, based on what we've taken in through the media, things that we have read, so on and so forth. So you have scenarios, to give some examples of mind's eye. You've got some scenarios where a person, you can do your research on the internet, you know what I mean, after this class or whatever the case may be, where a person, for example, stigmata, they claim that they've seen or maybe Mary appearing or whatever, and then maybe they get blood bleeding from their own hands in correlation to what they've seen, or they walked and they've seen Mary appear to them or whatever. Now the question is, I can't say whether it's true or not true. The issue is why is the vision always in the religion that the person believes in? Why is it not that a person walking along and they saw Buddha appear to them, and they've been like, there was a hard Christian, but they saw Buddha appear to them on the road when they were going to work or whatever and received this vision? Their vision is always in the religion, generally speaking, always in the same time, in what the person believes in. And so basically, and it can be deal with anything. It can be seeing extraterrestrials, orbs, spirits, ghosts, all sorts of things. Because remember, as we were moving through the society, we've seen movies, we've seen TV programs, we've read various different things, we've seen a lot of imagery around us, so on and so forth. We may have seen things in real life, and the brain's interpreted in a certain way to cope, as a coping mechanism to deal with certain situations. All of that is stored in the person's subconscious mind. And if you remember when the master teacher was speaking on the mystery of Ma'at tape, he was talking about on a certain level, when persons looking at journey, they're going to have to go back into the subconscious mind and deal with all of these situations. Some can appear as monsters and various different things, all created in our imagination based upon what we picked up in this subconscious mind. So one has to be mindful. It's not saying that spiritual things don't happen to people. So I don't want people to get on this thing of no spirituality. That's not what is being said. But you have to understand who you are as a human being, and understand, as I say, when we worked out how we see things, that it's a mental projection externally, how, as I say, our own mind's eye can fool us and trick us into things that we think we see, but are not really there in reality. Understand? And I think it's verse 77. I'm going to go back. Yeah, try and find this verse. I think we missed it out when we were going through the introduction. Yeah, because sometimes you challenge people, not challenge people, but you might speak to people about a spiritual experience or whatever. And if you don't accept it as being the case, where people get upset and mad. But the reality of the situation is, remember, only you can see that. You understand? Only you as the person can see that. So I haven't seen it. You saw it from your perspective, from your head. I'm not you. The only people on the planet who have even proven another person's existence is a woman who's had a child. And that's only at the time they were carrying the child. So as a man can't envision, hasn't even proven that another person on the planet outside of themselves has even existed. And guess who created all the religions? Men. Speculation. This is why women and men tend to get into a lot of discussions and arguments, because women are more grounded in reality. And based on what they see, not on what they're speculating in the future. You present your business idea to your missus of what you want to do or whatever the case may be. And you might say, yeah, I'm going to be a millionaire in 2 years. And as a man, you can see that, envisage it in your head. And when you bring it to your woman, she's not really buying it because she knows she only got £20 in your bank account. And then your man, well, it should be negative, you know, she's not even supporting my ideas. Well, she may well be. But until you manifest it, I was still not saying that women are not supported. I'm saying certain women. Until you manifest it, their mind is geared, is shaped in a way to deal with their visual people. I'm saying that's why their brain is wired to work. Understood? So when you see it, when you can prove it, then okay, yeah, then I accept it. And that's the way they're wired. So sometimes you have to know who we're out and what we are as human beings, and the way we communicate each other to know that, oh, well, that's the person's nature. So it's not really an argument, right? In fact, I'm going to present the idea, actually, I should utilize her knowledge, wisdom, and experience to see whether it holds up to those kind of tests. Not that one should forego their dreams or whatever it is, but they might need a reality check in certain instances. How are you going to manifest? Okay, I need to work harder on my plan. Understood? So here, when we look at this, verse 77, ultimate reality, yes? It says, inspiration and revelations are attributes and results that accompany reasoning. So we do receive, you understand, thoughts, certain inspiration, where it's like there may be flashes of understanding existence, flashes of understanding the universe, so on and so forth. Understood? But here what it says, yet they must always be checked out completely and thoroughly to confirm them being hakikat, actual facts. Confirmed, not beliefs, conjectures, fictions, fables, myths, and legends, as religions put forth in the Bible and Quran, fiction stories, even creatures of fictions, must be confirmed by sound right reason for authenticity and reasonability. That is to see that they are indeed true and make sense. Truth is truth, musbatu sabians. Now, this may be uncomfortable for some of us to take on, because there's work to be done even when we receive inspiration and visions and so on and so forth, and a level of correlation that has to be done. Maybe even before you share it. Now, I'm not saying don't share it and don't speak it out. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that you have to do the work to find out whether it's true or not. Somebody might ask me a question about a certain dream or whatever they experienced. I can't answer that because I wasn't there. I didn't see what it was. I can say to you, yes, the brain works in a certain way. You need to go back 72 hours into your past or whatever and look at what those influencing factors were. And if you can rule those out, then it may well have been a vision that you saw. But the work has to be done. And this is why I say, you can't be, some people that want to just be spiritual, just do with the metaphysical part. Some people want to deal with just the extraterrestrial part. Some people just want to deal with certain aspects of things. You have got to be 360. physical, 360 esoteric to master this thing. A person can't just be purely spiritual. I say they can't, they can do if they want to, but you can't just be purely spiritual and teach, because as some person, they can't see what's in your head. So you have to take the time out to be selfless in some instances and learn it in mediums that can be shared with other individuals, even though you may be more wired to that type of learn, teaching approach. It just means you're going to be able to bring certain experiential evidence to a certain subject or whatever, which makes it maybe more real for the person, or they're able to get better inner standing as opposed to even an overstanding of a certain subject. But if we're in service, we got to be everything. So mind's eye is a very powerful Parterac. I don't separate them, they're all things that you should all read, but a very powerful Parterac for us to think. At the same time, we have to have a level of open-mindedness to new subjects, because we don't know everything. And we don't know what we don't know. So when somebody introduces a new subject to us, then we have to, again, put certain things naturally through their relevant testing. But we have to be able to embrace new subjects, because our experience, certainly in the education system in the Western Hemisphere, is exceptionally limited. You understand? And we are looking at the world oftentimes through somebody else's vision. And not to make you all sick, I'm just trying to get back to where I was. So the mind's eye is significant. The mind's eye is dealing with, as I say, certain experiences. So somebody says they've seen extraterrestrials, so on and so forth, or whatever. One has to be conscious, is that mind's eye, or is what I saw real? You understand? Versus, and it's still the same thing, but Takus and Tabruz is dealing with, okay, well, and remember also in mind's eye, you've got other discarnate forces, which we talked about in that lower realm, or even external to that, that can in-house individuals and cause them to see certain things that are not there and not real also, for their own purposes. Yes, and takeovers in housing, so on and so forth. So Tabruz and Takus and Tabruz is dealing with, as I say, more dealing with extending what is in the 30, what's happening with those individual ancestors. So that may be if you say the difference between the two, then that will be the thing. You need to be conscious of both aspects in terms of your study and learning, and how one can be got. So you see here, as we was just touching upon, an experience of Takus reflection inside outward, and then Tabruz projection. So when we were talking about our vision, we're seemingly seeing something outside, isn't it? Yes, we're looking at a reflection of light back into the brain by way of the retina, and it appears upside down, understood, and then based on our knowledge and understanding, understood, the brain then processes that information and then projects back outwards, understood, on the object that we're seeing, what we think it looks like. Yes? Now, the issue is that, as I say, some of those spirit forces inside, and we hopefully did a good job in part 1 and 2 in establishing that basically just because you can't see something doesn't mean it doesn't exist, and how human beings' sight is between 400 and 700 nanometers in terms of the wavelengths that they can see, and then our hearing is between 20 and 20,000 hertz. So some other creatures whose parameters are wider than that, they can experience their senses work wider than that, see the world completely differently to what we do. Yes, there's a large proportion of things within existence we're not paying any attention to because of the way our senses are being wired, and part of that is also doing the way we've been taught. So here we see that although it may appear to be on the outside or projected outward or seem to originate outside, they're a cow mind on its own. The Ka'at spirit or Ka'atu spirits within are doing the work of deception. understand? So that's a generated image that we have to be conscious of. So interestingly, we were taught back in the day to read with an open mind, and we still need to read with an open mind with certain new subjects. But now, let's just ask about protection. One is now reading with a controlled mind. Understood? Yeah, read with a controlled mind now, as opposed to open mind. So you have to be conscious of what you're letting through in terms of that filter, and how it was generated. So basically, yeah, if you were watching a program, or because sometimes we're watching, or we're binge watching, isn't it? These series or whatever, and the impact of that kind of binge watching is it can have an impact on what you're thinking about, what you're seeing. Like when the kids are at the, playing or whatever, or not kids, but also adults as well, playing computer games. And you know how it is, you play on a computer game, you're on it for hours and hours and hours. You close your eyes and go to sleep. What are you seeing? You're seeing the same game or whatever, and when you wake up, it can affect, for a moment, if you're not careful, it can affect what you're looking at in terms of reality, what you're thinking, and so on and so forth. So one has to be conscious of these things. And in society today, certainly with modern technology, these things are becoming more extreme with more choice, because you can do what you want. Prior, when our technology was more limited, we didn't have, 10 TVs in the house. There's only one TV. So however they gave you it, it was always a mixture, isn't it, of various different things, especially with children's television. You understand? The cartoon was, your favorite cartoon was set in a myriad of education, storytelling, and different types of things or whatever. So you didn't just get to watch your favorite cartoon 10 hours straight, back to back, whatever the case may be. You learned something because there was a bit of a carrot and stick approach, because you learned something before they would show you a cartoon. That doesn't take place now. Yeah, and so dumbing down has taken place as a result of that. So you have to find new ways of educating now that we have choice. Now, the issue is that with this reflection and projection is that these adverse forces are seeking to gain strength and take over control of the vessel, which is you as the human body. And this power that they can feed off, if they get control of some of our activities, they can affect, depending on their strength, things in the outside world. So affecting lights, even strong enough, move objects, cause noises, understood, around the place, or whatever the case may be. And so for their own ends. Now, obviously we have got positive and negative ancestry taking place in that control group, or whatever the case may be. But say if we're not aware of it, then, as I say, they can start taking control. Now, the issue or challenge for us is if they seemingly drain our energy, it can cause a problem, as it's saying there in verse 31, where basically when it comes for certain of us, when we pass and it's time to transition, there is not enough energy or power there to make it up to the higher ether levels. You understand? At 7, 8, and 9 ether. 7, 8, and 9 ether for us will always be of our own ancestry. Understand? And always agreeable. Whereas when you're dealing with 1 to 6 ether, they will always not be of our own ancestry. And if we find ourselves down there, we can find ourselves becoming an etheric battery for lower forces. As we said in part 2, many of us do not know, and even us to the fore, we don't really know the real value of having soul. Because it's universal context. And what it is, we haven't really truly experienced it, because we don't know what it is to live as another person who doesn't have it, unless we've lost it. And maybe even then, if we lost it, we wasn't paying enough attention to it to know that we lost it by way of certain behaviors and decisions that we've taken. So the value of it, or what people would do to get a piece of it, or to get a piece of it on death, you understand? And remember, if it's to get a piece of it on death, what's happening? Certain races and cultures on the planet are going to be designed to help facilitate that process, to empower their ancestors when we die. Because that's the game. That's the rules of nature. A race's purpose and energy is tied to direct its emotional energy to its ancestral, to its ancestors. So those ancestral forces can continue to ascend. Remember, when we die or when we pass, that energy is held in a holding pattern, in a morphogenetic field. It stores our ancestors until they're strong enough or powerful enough to ascend. Yeah, and if you think about it as Sabaeans, when a Sabaean passes, we wear white to funerals because white is a symbol of, or tone of, death, the absence of energy, if we look in nature. Understood? And we dress in white to the funeral, and you have what? A balloon ceremony takes place, isn't it? What does those balloon ceremonies symbolize? Yeah, they're the aspects of a person's mental, which on this level appears as soul, understand, which is made up of different aspects of spirits. We talked about earlier, it shatters at the point of death, and it's going to ascend or align itself to the vibrational energy of those last sets of thinking. So if it was thinking in those positive and agreeable settings, then it's going to find itself at those 7, 8, and 9 ether levels. If we died in fear, trauma, these types of things, then guess where certain aspects of us are going to be? It's going to basically align itself now with the 1 to 6 ether levels, ready then to be utilized by beings, as I say, who now can feed off of that energy. And you think about in your society today, you switch on the television, BBC One, BBC Two, ITV, or whatever the case may be. How many programs are designed to keep you in that stressed, you understand, fearful, negative state? If you were to take a pen, just tick off how many programs about murder, how many programs about bailiffs kicking off the door, how many programs about only but negativity, stress, which causes stress, causes a person to secrete adrenaline, as opposed to what TV could be showing. And then you look at the news. So all of these things are designed in a way to cause you to secrete energy that empowers lower forces. And until, I'm not saying in all instances, but it's certainly until the master teacher came along, when he's broke down about the spell that we're suffering from. So you first got to realize you're sick, then diagnose what we're suffering from, and then we got to see, well, what the cure is. We wasn't even aware that we were sick, or that we're walking into situations where people are taking full advantage of what we are. And it happens outside of us externally when we think about how many things of black people put their soul into, and then white people have gone on to make the millions or billions of dollars from it, and still continue to do today. Certain people, which I won't say their names, certain people or their religions are designed to take advantage of us, and have continued to do so for many years. But now they want to cry like they're the victims. Continue to use black faces as ghouls to sell products into the black community that are designed and targeted for black men, black women, black young people, but it's white ownership that sits behind it. Now, if it's for everybody, sell your product to everybody. To be successful in business is about who you do not offend. But you've got people that utilize certain artists, and hip-hop artists in the main, we've seen more recently, giving the impression that they are the owners, that they came up with this product. They gave the creative energy or whatever to this product, when they are just a front face to sell products into the black community, when the people that own it are not black and not selling it to their children. You want to sell poison to everybody's children. If you're selling it to a certain group of racist children to feed and make money to send your children through college, then we should have a right to say something about that. That's morally not right. We better become wise to how that is taking place in the invisible adverse forces as well as the visible ones. Yeah, because we're dealing with the generational effects of that type of situation. So you need to think about who we're falling in love with, because we need to rise in love. Protect your genes. Protect your genes. Yeah, we have to start making decisions now that basically support our ascension journey. We're not a one lifetime people. Yeah, and it takes a lot to get even out of this dimension. Why would they give you 24,000 attempts of life if it's easy to get out of? These are things we have to start thinking about. And this doctrine, the many hundreds of books, thousands of hours of lectures that have been given for us are to raise our mind, our intellect, but we won't listen. We don't want to read. We don't want to re-add that which was lost. We're taking our time. Dilly and dallying. Is it right? Is it wrong? Such and such and such and such. Not dedicating our lives to transformation. Yeah, until it's going to be too late. Yeah, and now Panatharu, you know what I mean? Or a hole has been punched in the boat in the situation we find ourselves in right now, where we're happy to come together, understood, and change. So this is us understanding, this is some real old slides, but from Feeding the Forces and other books of that nature, to understand, as I say, or try and get an understanding of what can kind of take place in terms of us being this etheric battery for the higher levels, and how we have to take even control of, yes, we live in our life right now, and how we are connected to our ancestors right now, what's going to happen when we pass. We want control of those scenarios, so we end up at these higher levels, understood, where the aspects of our mental, all of it's going to go and not be used, as I say, for this kind of entities, which is why even in our death rituals, if we're not burying people in our own land and doing our own rituals, then the best thing in the scenario is to have a cremation. Burn it so nothing's left, as best as you can do. You understand? Burn it or have it burned so nothing's left. Yeah, because you know if you don't take control, they're going to use it for their own purposes. Yeah, and we used to think, this seems extreme. This seems like it's a bit too much. Yeah, when in the various different schools we went to, they said, well, Master Teacher, you should ask for the placenta in your birthing ceremony. And go and bury it in a garden, do you understand? Do a certain ritual, whatever. Return it back to the earth from whence it came. Obviously, because, you know, black people don't like to feel no shame. So, go and ask for that. It's embarrassing. But, you know, those of you who've experienced asking for it, when you ask for it, they don't say, well, why are you asking for it? They say, yes, we'll pack that up for you and we'll put it in a bag or whatever. And they do it for you without questioning. But if you don't ask for it, guess where it ends up? In hair products, in various different experiments. If you don't ask for it, you don't even know what it's being used for. Only to find out, as we expressed, I think in a printed, I think it was New Scientist magazine, they were finding out that young black women, children, were having the onset of puberty at ages 9, 10, etc. And when they researched into it, it was because the hair products that they was using had hormones in it from placentas. And it was triggering the onset of puberty early in black females. This is the type of stuff that can happen. Why we need to pay attention to what's going on. So what we're teaching here is not magical teachings. It's just reality teachings of what is taking place and why, as I say, certain religions have been put in place, fostered upon you. It's got nothing to do with your emotional well-being. It's all to do with how can we draw emotional energy from this individual. And you, as I say, do not know what one piece of your soul, how much 6 evil forces it powers. You are ignorant to that. And what they would do to just get that one person, yeah, at that point of death. That's how the whole system is wired for that. It's all geared around death. That's why you say good morning. M-O-U-R-N-I-N-G. So this soul, let's say, at a certain point, yeah, it seemingly, this is just an expression, but it shatters. Yeah, maybe the best word for it, or dismembers. Yeah, maybe it's a better word for it. And so, as I say, the floating or ascending, it's why you release those balloons, because it's symbolic of that ascension. And what really should happen is that we're supposed to stay connected. This is one of the real crying shames of the religions that we're in, is because us putting so much emotional energy into our Christianity, us putting so much emotional energy into Islam, us putting so much that emotional energy into Judaism, none of it is helping your great-great-grandmother who passed to push her and help her to ascend to that next level. It's all going into nothingness. And the funny thing about it is when you look at a lot of their Greek mythology and look at a lot of their stories, it tells you about certain things, where the gods didn't have enough love from human beings or whatever, so they became weak over time. This is in their mythology, Greek, Roman mythology. Go and look up some of these stories and the films that we watched over the many years. Human beings, as technology increased or whatever, they wasn't giving or directing their love to the gods. But there's a, with them, there's always something, some trickery and technology behind what they're dealing with. So in there was some element of truth as it pertained to our culture and the way that we work. Because those that don't have soul, they only have and ka'ah, that's the etheric aspect, and the spirit are condemned. They don't leave this plane of existence. That white light that they're seeing there brings them to these lower forces, and they're trapped here. That's why they hate you for having soul, because that soul connected with the connected with the ka'ah, enables you to travel to different worlds, ascend to different dimensions, experience life in multiple different ways and experiences. They don't have that. Yeah, and took themselves off of that phylogenetic tree when they started experimenting by mixing animal parts with human bodies. Yeah, hence replacing human heart valves with pig hearts, and so on and so forth. That type of experimentation that was taking place moved their race off of that phylogenetic tree, and they lost their soul. As well as the actions and activities that have been embracing themselves with for the last 6,000 years. They chose that. So their ancestors abandoned them. And now they have become a source or force of energy to feed, flesh and discarnate entities, with not only their own people's flesh, but if they can do, our spiritual power, as well as that to boot. Yeah, for those who feed off and live off that type of energy. Yeah, so we're just showing you, a few examples of how that is taking place. Yeah, so we are supposed to be maintaining, our attachment to our ancestors and empower them as other generations would empower us. That's one of the greatest gifts, not only the language and the teaching of Wu-Sabat, but it's the knowledge of reconnecting, with your great-grandmother, your grandmother who may have passed, you understand? Because that is your help. Talk about limping in the Olympics. We have been denying our help, not even calling upon it. So remember, as it was expressed in Master Secrets Part 1, yeah, it was talking about you're not in this situation for what you have done, but rather for what you have failed to do. We've had that help out there. We've had the power to overcome certain things out there, but we're not using it. Because he ran up ahead and said, that's black magic. Don't touch it. So you feel self-conscious now about calling upon your own deities that look like you. When in actuality, that is the closest reality. You got more evidence that your great-grandmother exists than Jesus did. They haven't found Jesus' bones yet. And most of the times that we are calling upon these things and certain things may work for us, it is our own positive mentality that has manifested a positive action as a result of that prayer. But that power could be ever more forceful if we were calling upon our etheric ancestors and power to help us in certain situations. And the reality is, and we say this all the time, those who seemingly are running the world right now, yeah, July just passed, didn't it? They held their spiritual rituals, yeah, calling upon their ancestors to maintain what they're doing. So why is it wrong for us to do the same, to counteract that power? Because if you're not strong as an individual, how can you be strong enough to help others? So these spiritual abilities we have to perfect and maintain as a result, and not make them subject, as I say, to being used by lower forces through our ignorance. And that's what we're correcting through these classes today. So you can see this etheric battery, that soul can be utilized, yeah, as an etheric battery, let's say, to discarnate entities at lower levels, these lower ether levels. The same way today they promote, let's say, externally to our vision, they promote race mixing. And I say I'm not interested in whether who you love or whatever. So that's entirely up to the individual. And so we're not anti that in that sense, but it's making the point to say if somebody has an agenda of miscegenation, you understand, i.e. they are manipulating the media and things of that nature to ensure that racial mixing takes place because they want to utilize your strong genes to keep them going and you're not aware of it, that's a problem. If you're being programmed that way for that agenda, that is a problem. Yeah, which is what we see all the time, especially in England. I'm sure it is in the States, but in England, you rarely see a black man and black woman on a TV screen. Rarely. Their version of black is a black person with a white woman on the screen with mixed race children. That is what you see mainly in the media. And we're supposed to accept that as blackness. But you're paying your TV license for that. That's what people forget in this country. We're paying a TV license for that. So you're paying to facilitate our own destruction. Any questions?
No questions.
Okay. So part of what we need to build up, as well as concentration, which we're going to get through in a bit, in this part, I'm going over into the second part, is building up a psychic self-defense. So a strong mentality, a positive way of thinking in all circumstances, even when situations are negative, that we maintain ourselves on a higher frequency of thinking. This is so that we don't drop our vibrational rate and then basically we become exposed to, let's say, these lower adverse forces. So this can happen when we're overly angry. It could happen in situations where maybe we've drinking too much alcohol, whatever, and become drunk. We leave ourselves open, let's say, to attack. Remember, you think about when your physical health gets compromised, understood, it's because your immunity to disease has been lowered. And that can be lowered even, think about it, through stress, taking in the wrong foods, so on and so forth. It can lower your ability to fight disease. And so we have to think, if that's what happened physically, there is a similar spiritual or etheric correlation to that. It's going to work in exactly or a similar way. So us being down, depressed, negative, can leave ourselves open, as I say, to attack. And so psychic self-defense is about us finding a way of doing positive thinking. And when we say positive thinking is a combination of a number of different things. It is prayer, the right type of prayer in the right direction. It is meditation. It is drinking a sufficient amount of water. Understood? It is reading positive things or intaking positive things to keep us in that higher mentality, even when negative things happen. So if you think about it, the psychic self-defense, you think about this tightrope walker here, yes, who's actually walking in a tightrope. Why you choose to do that, no one knows. But the example is that basically, in order to do that, oftentimes they are using a form of reflection and projection, insofar as they are fooling the mind into thinking that they're walking here on pavement, on lower ground. Yeah, so they're using that imagery, yeah, that image, imagination, image and nation, and that projection to say, hey, I'm walking, this ain't nothing. I am actually walking on the ground. I just need to maintain and walk in very specifically in this line. You understand? And so this is what in a mind, but this is what they're really doing. You understand? They're walking on the ground, even though they're walking, let's say, on a rope, very thin rope, which is maintaining them at those significant heights. So you have to have a strong mental disposition in order to do that. You understand? The elimination or eradicating of fear. You understand? What is fear? False education appearing real. Understood? So you have to fool the mind. Yeah? Psych is dealing with what? It's linked to the word lie. Yes, so psychic or side chick, as I said, is like a lying female. That's what the word really means. But psychic or psychic is to lie to oneself. Understood? So, as I say, even in a negative situation, what you find, or attribute of one of the incarnated masters, is that even in negative situations, they're able to maintain a positive outlook or a positive energy around them, even in difficult situations. So don't let their vibrational rate, or some biblically there's a countenance, but their vibrational rate drop, so they can be housed by lower forces. Understood? And that links also into concentration. So there are a number of things that, you know, in inverted commas, that wind you up, aren't there? You understand? But it's how you respond to those situations, understood, whether you accept, or what they refer to as those triggers, or you don't accept them. Do you understand? And in some instances, you have to train yourself not to react in certain situations for the purpose of survival. And they do it at work all the time. A lot of people do it at work all the time. They accept a lot of nonsense and things because obviously they got bills to pay. But obviously the danger of doing that sometimes is that you can create a fake individual, if you're not careful, becomes a real individual. So you have to understand what you're doing. So in that sense, understand if I'm going to do that in that situation, I'm training myself to initiate a certain type of projection in that situation. So even with you've got a work self. You understand? That's what you should. I'm just being myself. No, you're not being yourself if you're at work. Create a work you. And understand that work you, that when you walk out the door, whatever, or you're in certain environments, that's the work you. Separate that work you from the real you. You understand? Whether you label it with a name or color, boom, 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 boom. You understand? You have these different aspects of yourself that you're placing in certain situations. And you can build attributes and characters around it in your mind. You understand? People do it all the time. Yeah, but maybe in wrong and negative ways, egotistical, self-serving ways. But now you can learn to do those things in building, as I say, a you that is able to withstand certain situations, or maintain a positive set of thinking. That doesn't mean become weak or a pushover in that regard, but it does mean, as I say, maintain your strength so it doesn't drop to a low enough level where it can cause you difficulties or problems where you are not in control. So the key thing for us is that when they talk about somebody losing their soul, so to speak, it's referencing the fact that basically their connection, throughout these various different planes is broken because they're not the one in control of the decisions. Something has taken over. It can be alcohol, you know what I mean? If someone's drinking too much, and then basically what happens, they become open, isn't it? It could be housed by certain forces or whatever. They're not acting like themselves. Now, if you become a slave to that, i.e. addicted to it, that's when that connection can break. And if you think about it, why would that be designed into the approach? Is because you being etheric and physical, your behavior can affect higher levels of planes of existence or ether if those connections were not quarantined. Because you're both. Yeah, you have the ability through your melanin, through your soul, to transition and vibrate up the various different ether levels. So you can become a conduit for allowing negative forces to in-house higher areas of vibrational existence by you, because you have the physical attributes or connections, as well as the etheric attributes and connections to make that happen. So certain gates are put in to avoid that. You understand? And open at a certain time, and those who transition through whatever, have to have the correct attributes to make it through. And develop themselves to a certain level of spiritual development, positive vibrational rates and energy in order to transition and make it through. Yeah, which we may call tests, gates, so on and so forth. Yeah, as a result of that. Any questions?
Yes, there is. There's a question from Claudette, and her question is: some ancestors within our gene pool may be negative. How do we know whether or not they would act in our interest? Does that affect us when that were known to be negative?
It's a very good question. I suppose the best way to answer that is, the only way you're going to know is if you essentially do some research externally to find out as best as you can do who those people are. Now, whether that's a case of speaking to family members who knew individuals and trying to get I suppose the technical term is oral history or whatever of who were those people in the 30. But in the absence of that, you won't know unless you start paying attention to what happens in certain situations. Now, I can't say that that's going to tell you, oh, well, that was number 9 or number 10 or whatever the case may be, without the correlation or information that says, well, he was like this or she was like that. Actually, I'm seeing that behavior manifest in some of my activity when I'm in certain situations, or why I get angry with that, or why I don't like this, or why I don't like that. There's a correlation between that and how that person lived. So I suppose in essence, you've got to put mechanisms in place or master the things that control everybody to make them work positively in your regard, irrespective of whether they were positive or negative. Yeah, because you are the one in control. So when you're dealing with the ritual, natural laws in nature say that, okay, well, when I ask them to do something, as long as it's, let's say, it's not things that are going to then break other rules, then essentially they're compelled to respond to those requests. So the genie myth, when you look at that word genie, where they kind of rub a lamp, isn't it? And then you get the genie trapped, and you ask them, they ask you, have you got 3 wishes or whatever? You say, yes, can I have 3 more wishes? You understand? The requests you make, they're compelled to respond. So you have them in your control. If you look at the word genie, the word genes is in there, isn't it? Yeah, genes, generations, yeah? Genie, sometimes the I at the end in certain language structures denotes possession. Understood? So you've got control once you understand the rituals. And even in the ritual, there's a thing where you light the candle, you have their picture, all the things, the lamp. If you can see in the myth, yeah, it's correlated to some level of how the ritual is. So you have to just take control of them. One of the ways is basically understanding through some element of quiet contemplation which aspects of the decisions that you are making are absolutely you and not being influenced by any external force. And in doing so, you gain a certain level of control. As I say, once you learn the ritual, you can take the time to get to know the individuals in this 4 generations, and you can establish a certain level of protection. So the oldest, oftentimes the oldest female, so your great-great-grandmother, either on your mother or your father's side, is basically the one that you make contact with first. Now, if you haven't got information, you haven't got it, so just have to work with what you've got. But the reason why you establish the communication with that one first is because that etheric, I suppose, formulated kind of mitochondrial link, they are the protectors against the other 30. So once you make the connection with that oldest female, sacred feminine ancestor, she acts as the protector against the rest. So if there's an issue that occurs or some kind of problem or whatever, then you need to request or put certain control. Things are not going right or whatever, but you need that protection. Then you need to be drawing upon her, the request to that answer, because she forms that protection against the others, maybe who are more adverse or negative within the group. So in that, you can kind of understand why they took so much time in removing us even caring about or taking knowledge of keeping those records, those ancestral records. Now we're doing it for more egotistical. I want to know that I came from this tribe in Africa. I want to know that I came from whatever, not knowing that we're handing over valuable genetic data, which they're keeping in databases, to try and now categorize who's who on the planet, looking for this kind of mafruzet or liquid gold, producing DNA and for various other purposes that they've got. So you can see why I say they made you not care about, you understand, they made you care about people not in between, because that took you away from reality into myth, and then left you now without the relevant protection you need. As we say, it's called idol worship, I-D-L-E, yeah, idol, meaning we're putting our emotional energy into something that's not, it goes into nothing, it's not yielding any results, as opposed to directing that energy to, let's say, an ancestor who is blood linked to you, who you know exists, no sacrificing of blood, nothing of that nature. You are linked to them from a DNA perspective. They're in your bloodstream. That's why you call upon them. It's just a case, the ritual is initiating the correct telephone number to reach them so that you can obviously communicate that request. The problem is at certain times they will try and get in contact, they will try and communicate, but we are vibrating on such a low level that it's difficult to then communicate. So it's not like they can physically manifest or whatever the case may be without permission or somebody giving them the rules to do so. So our prayer system, called Ashutat at one time as ancient Egyptians, now today known as Sabaeans, basically the Ashutat ceremony used to align your endocrinal glandular system as you chanted, etc. It helped to align those glands. And that eventually, if you mastered that ritual to a certain level or point, you could create a portal or a gateway where your great-grandmother could come through that portal and you could have a conversation. In this day and time, or for now, you work with an altar, as I say, with a picture of your ancestor, but you only have one picture up. You don't have, if you've got 3 that you found within the 30, you don't have the 3 facing upwards. If you're trying to communicate, you show the proper respect, you face down the other pictures, and the person you're trying to communicate with, you light a candle, you burn a little bit of white sage or whatever the case would be, and then you start putting your requests. The only way you're going to know it's true, factual, whether it works, is if you put it to the test. And I can say it does work because I've experienced it, but if you listen to me, you shouldn't take what I say, it's just belief. You've got to put it to work, know that, yes, you know what I mean, certain people in your family, yeah, that my grandmother was loving, or my grandmother was this way. Even if they wasn't, you can still make that connection, because the reason is when you pass onto the other side, your making the connection now. So when you pass on the other side, they're there waiting for you to help you transition, because you've already made those connections. So you're not going in cold. When you're born into this world, there was a set of loving people waiting there, hopefully, or at least one, if it was only your mother, but there was, in a functional setup, there would be a series of loving people, you know what I mean, medically and otherwise, waiting there to guide you and bring you through as you were born into this world. So the same thing is to happen when you transition, when you go across. And so as you can see, even from this slide, it shows that, yeah, the gate opens at 3 a.m. In the morning. It's a way where people who have died are able to transition or pass through that gateway. And so if you've established those connections to be met by Nasabu relatives, your ancestors, as I say, who are waiting there to meet you, who you may never have met, because that's their job and the role in the rules of where they are at. And if you think about it, you think about the ancient Tamarans, the ancient Egyptians, the Mukmatu, they basically, a pharaoh was thinking about his ascension well into, his prime of his life. They were building monuments and things, and planning their ascension, obviously partway through their life. They wasn't waiting till they was on their deathbed, or, you understand? Call the priest where they're on their deathbed, now I want to convert to this or that. No, they were planning part way through their life, because as we said in the previous class, your ancestors see this existence as death and where they are as living, because we cut on, in the darkness, we cut on the light of life. And the fact that we're born means that we are destined to what? Die. So the light of life is cut on, in the sense it's going to be temporary, isn't it? But the darkness is eternal. So they perceive this as death and where they are as living. So you have the ability to transition and you establish those relationships from now. Any other questions?
Yes, I have a question from you, Jana. I think that's how the name is pronounced. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. I'm going to allow you to ask your question. So I'm going to unmute your microphone and you can ask your question. You may speak now.
Tawa'at. Ojana is perfect, thank you. The question I had was from your previous slide. At the bottom it said, blessed out, supremely happy counterparts equals upper stored in vast geometric patterns. They reincarnate or fade into nothingness. I'm not familiar with the phrase blessed out, supremely happy. Could you just give us a bit more information on what that actually means, please?
Yes, sure, no problem. So basically, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the morphogenetic field. So there's a vast etheric fields that when our ancestors pass, or when we pass on, our mental energy or our soul, our spirit, the various different aspects of us transition to the higher levels. And so at 9, 8, and 7 ether, they are basically considered to be positive. Understood? So agreeable energy only. So that's what it's, when it's talking about blessed out, happy, it's talking about that is the energy that retains itself in that environment. Understood? To then be ready then to transition on, if strong enough, understood, to then move on to higher levels of, or higher forms of existence. Now that can be, decision may be to reincarnate, decision may be to go to other planets, decision may be to incarnate as a different life form, understood, as part of the soul's willingness to experience different types of existence. But it's making reference to the fact that it's purely positive in those regions. It's not, as the converse is, pain dominated or fear controlled, in the sense lower vibrational frequencies. So that's what it's making reference to, and that is from a book referred to as Feeding the Forces. And so in that there's an Egyptian phrase which we'll probably get onto in part 4 called Rey or Reye Hara Achet. And one of the uses for Rey Hara Achet is basically to realign, yes, our ancestral energy, because part of it, because you may have died, part of you was stressed, part of you was positive, you got split. You understand? Some of you's ended up at the lower end, some of you ended up at the higher end, and we need to now remove these lower-ended aspects of self so they're all in 7, 8, and 9 ether. So that's what blessed out or supremely happy is relating to. It's a type of frequency that exists within the morphogenetic field for our race at these 9, 8, 7 ether levels. There's nothing currently in existence on this physical earth at the moment that can measure these higher levels of ether. You understand? And this is why the importance, which we're not going to get time to go into today, is with this Amun Nabab Rey Ahatta, is because basically, although these levels exist in us, without knowledge of what that vibrational rate is, we're not able to correlate to it. So a person can't, having no knowledge or experience of it, they can't raise up to a 7 ether level or 8, 9, so on and so forth, and vibrate to a level where they transform to exist at that frequency solely. You understand? But somebody who has knowledge of how to differentiate, for example, between those different levels, so somebody can differentiate between plane and full, spiritual, mental, divine truth, divine reality, so on and so forth, is then able to teach somebody by, you understand, physical contact or correlation, so that then the atoms within the person then know, well, that is how you differentiate between the two. Therefore, understanding the difference means that I can use my, you understand, third eye, my pineal gland, so on and so forth, and match, you understand, those frequencies, which is what a person is, or the differentiator. When a person has got soul, it was equated to dancing, isn't it? A person can dance in time, or they can sing within rhythm. But really what that's displaying is the ability for one to sink in with certain frequencies. Yeah? I hope that answers your question. If not, please question further.
Yes, Tawahat.
Antat Adhya Afwa. Any other questions?
Yes, we have another question from Aha, and the question is, how do we recognize the gates mentioned?
There's some good questions. And maybe that goes into more what we're getting into in part 4, but I'll because you've asked it, we'll touch upon it now. So remember, you came by way of this world, you came through a gateway. It was called a black hole. Understood? Not to be crass. Understood? The reason why you can't go back the same way you came is because you're too big now. You've expanded physically, obviously, and so you can't go back the same way we came in. Yeah, our universe has expanded. So there are gateways, understood, which have been established to allow, transitions to higher realms for us to then reconnect back with our higher ancestors, our etheric ancestors, referred to as the Panatharu. Now, the reason why they exist in that way or in that fashion was because, as I say, you need to go back to a class we've done recently, but if you haven't got that, I think the book is Tones, DNA and Vibrational Energy, Actual Facts. I think it's number 18, if memory serves me correctly. But basically, at a certain point, we were to a level where we had no need of the physical body any longer. And so our ancestors at that point, basically, in an instant, transitioned to higher states of existence to exist as pure ether or pure energy. Understood? But there were aspects of our race at that time that were too material. So they did not want to transition. They loved the physical life, whatever. And so did not want to transition to those higher levels. But their behavior was impacting, because of that etheric link or connection that we have by race, not necessarily just dealing with genes, we have a connection by race yeah, and even a zero time reference that is linked to us by race. You have a zero time reference as an individual, but we have a zero time reference as a race, as a species, yeah, as human beings. So basically that connection was still there, so they had to find a way to cut it off. Now, you know, in our culture, the Sirius and Orion star constellations have significant importance in the way in which we do things. Certain monuments were built aligned with it, so on and so forth. In fact, female DNA comes from Sirius, and masculine DNA comes from Orion. Understood? Sirius star constellation is the gateway between the 18th and the 19th galaxy. So the 19th galaxy was where our higher ancestors existed, not just in the same space and time, but in a higher dimensional vibrational existence at that time. And so in order to cut off that connection, they collapsed Sirius C, that star. They collapsed it in one instance. Understood? Which basically devastated that star system, but it basically meant there wasn't a physical transition or wormhole that you could go through to pass through to arrive at 19 if you did not have, as I say, without going through or raising one's level of vibration. So they cut themselves off from, as I say, a certain level of existence to stop the physical behaviors of those lower entities affecting the higher stage of ether. So these gateways are basically set in certain places, but they're only able to be detected by human beings who have a high vibrational rate. Yeah, and they are known as hermaphrodites for females and hermaphrodites for males. Yeah, XY, X chromosomes, YXY chromosomes. They're called gatekeepers. Yes, and they're born, obviously a certain type of genetic configuration means that they're not common in the same. Now, in this society today, we don't talk much about neutral gender beings, yeah, or what we refer to in Wu-Sabat as bathanoid. So you have masnoid male, you have femnoid female, and you have bathanoid, which is considered to be neutral gender. But masnoid, femnoid, and bathanoid all come out of the female. The female gave birth to neutral gender, understood? And male gender and neutral gender. Yeah. So before we were separated into two distinct, what you call genders or sexes, we came from, excuse me, these neutral gender beings. That was the first manifestation of us in something called Project 24. So because they have this extra chromosomal power, they vibrate at a higher level. Now, some people say, you might say, oh, in slang, so a person's going on extra, or we use the word maybe wrongly for extrovert or whatever. But these people, and sometimes you think it's fake. Sometimes you meet certain people that you think it's fake. Well, they're showing so much vibes and energy or whatever the case may be, and that's because they do have more energy than the normal person and are able to raise their vibrational rate up. And there's a certain ritual which we're going to go into in the next class, yeah, so we can show you the correlation to show the way in which a gate is opened correlates to how DNA is structured. It correlates to how certain minerals on this planet are structured and why they were used in certain coverings for some of our structures, yeah, to enable outformation, interdimensional communication. So the pyramids, for example, that you see today were not shown as exposed stone. They were all covered in crystals, one of them being the quartz crystal. So say in part 4, whatever the last part of this, we'll go into that in more detail. So in simplicity, gatekeepers can identify gates, and they are more of a rarity. The issue may be in societies that, particularly in the black community or black race around the world, is that monotheistic religion has led to there's always a nine mind way of looking at things, and a 6 ether perspective of looking at things. And in the 9 mind perspective of looking at things, what's happened is that because of the Bible, the Torah, the Bible and the Quran, basically and our belief in those systems, there's been a lot of adversity around what may be considered to be same-sex relationships and various different things. And so therefore, somebody coming out at a certain point expressing those kind of preferences, understood, could be vilified, could be attacked, killed, so on and so forth, when in actuality for them it's a naturally occurring scenario. But because in society we don't teach about hermaphrodite and hermaphrodites, or whatever the case may be, well, what would you express it as? You're just going to express it about what's been taught. So you think, well, that means I'm gay, or that means I'm this, or that means I'm that, because no one sat down and was open, because in religion it's about suppressing sexuality, understood, and more importantly suppressing female pleasure within sexuality. Hence why female genital mutilation, heinous kind of act, was in male-dominated religions to suppress the female experiencing any kind of pleasure, when in actuality you need part of the higher aspects of sex raise a person's vibrational rate to experience, higher forms of thinking and receiving inspiration. Sometimes after sex or whatever, a person's open. This way, you've got to be careful about how you make sure you're clean, bath, bathe, whatever. Make sure, because obviously there's entities waiting to take advantage of this higher energy. But if you didn't fall asleep after performing the sexual act, basically your mind is open to receiving higher levels of inspiration, both male and female. So in that regard, so that problem can mean that gatekeepers may be living a certain type of alternative lifestyle because they didn't have the information to know exactly who and what they were, and therefore now when they come out in the black community, now it could be vilified, attacked, so on and so forth. And that person might be, damn, we need that person for the next level of evolutionary ascension, because that's a gatekeeper. Now that is very different to what's being pushed from a Six Ether agenda point of view, which is population control and stopping us, certainly as a race and other races, stopping them from having babies, because we become the majority in a lot of instances and not a minority, as they call us. And that's very different to a person, for example, that's been born, same sex or hormone sexual because of a defect which has happened in the what they call pregnancy, but while the woman is carrying a child. So let me make that clear so that we know what we're talking about. So when you talk about a hermaphrodite and hermaphrodite, XY, X chromosome, Y, XY, and there's a few other combinations of that, 7 in total. Basically, that is naturally occurring. So that's the same, naturally occurring, not a problem, same way as somebody being born male or female. And even that is dependent on the correlation to the amount of zinc a person has in their body versus the amount of iron. So if the male at the time had more zinc in his body than iron, when he donated his sperm for conception, then they're going to produce a male child. If at that time he had more iron in his body than zinc, he's going to produce a female child. Understand? So there's a science to it. It's not this mystery and thing that we think of, or pot luck or whatever, or chance in nature in that regard. There's a science to it that can be controlled and understood. Now, when a woman is pregnant or carrying a child, 6 to 8 weeks in the birthing process, gender is determined, understood? Now, if the woman is stressed out, and this is what the importance about planning children is important. If a woman can become stressed out in her pregnancy, it can affect the way in which that individual, or the hormones, act within that person. What can happen is a person can be born, hormonally, so what the hormones are sending out in terms of the messages, hormonally female inside, but born in the body of a male. So they have a male physical body, but the messages inside, the hormones being secreted, are giving the impression that the person's a female. So it creates a defect, what is known as a hormone sexual. So the internal female is attracted to the external male form, hence you have a same-sex relationship. Understood? That is still nature, but it's a defect in nature. And it reverses in the same way for what they classify as a lesbian. Do you understand? So that is basically a person who is internally, the hormones are saying, I'm male, but they're born in a female body. Do you understand what I'm saying? So the internal male is attracted to the female external form, hence you have same-sex relationships. Again, a defect in nature. Now, some people taking offense is a defect. If I wear glasses, you understand? And in nature, it means my eyes are not working correctly. That is a defect in nature. Understood? This is what it is. It's saying you learn to live with it. Not saying there's anything wrong, blah, blah, blah. It's just part of nature and part of what it is. So people who are born in that regard, it's natural. You understand? It's part of what it is, etc. Live, so on and so forth. It's not your preference. If someone's not asking for your telephone number, why are you concerned yourself about it? Do you understand? Okay, and it's got nothing to do with your biblical and so on and so forth traditions. The God of the Bible wasn't interested in, when he was saying man don't sleep with man, it's because that was interfering with the production of the food source, because human beings were a source of food for them. They didn't want man going on with that behavior. But yet certain people they're allowed, like King David had a homosexual relationship with Jonathan. They didn't put him in the ground or kill him, they let him do what he's doing. You understand? So in their stories. So the problem in the black community, our morals around that have been birthed from monotheism. They haven't been birthed from actual facts and what's taking place in nature. So you have people who are born that way, as I say, defect if it's hormone sexuals, but still natural. You understand? Like somebody being born with a defect, they have to manage whatever in nature, like bad eyesight, for example. And then you have, as I say, you have hermaphrodites and hermaphrodites who may manifest that preferences. Some may be in relationships where they're with a woman, some may be the same, because again, they're neither one or the other. But what can happen is that they may interpret because they are different, they may interpret that because of the options available in society as being, let's say, gay or whatever the case may be. Now, there's other terms now, pansexual and different things. There's so many that keep adding all the time. It's difficult to keep up. But there's other terms now, as knowledge has evolved, that they may be able to choose and say, I'm this, but they may be a gatekeeper. Other situations now arise because of exchanging in genes. So basically, and what is being promoted in music, movies, TV programs, so on and so forth, where somebody can become that way by conversion. And that's a different type of scenario there. So somebody can be looking at these things, and what happens is, particularly, not exclusively, but particularly with both male and females, but in the case of females, if she takes in the genes of too many males, yeah, because she's had partners who are too close together or whatever the case may be, because foreign DNA out of the female system, unless by way of ritual, can take, doesn't always take, but can take up to 7 years to remove itself from her system. So in an instance where, for example, she's taken in, I don't know, it could be natural, not no big thing. Maybe she has a boyfriend 1 year, next year has another boyfriend. Basically what can happen is that the male genes inside of her are attracted to the female form, correct? So if she then sees, okay, I'm seeing these hip hop artists, and when they were on interviews, they're into threesomes, or they're into this, or they're into that. And you're seeing videos of women, you understand, getting together, whatever. Then on another podcast or whatever, they're talking about, oh yeah, I've tried that, I've tried this, and the people they look up to have all tried this thing. What is happening is, it's not that the woman herself is gay, it's the man inside her that's attracted to those females that is driving or fueling certain desires, which if she's not clued up, she can interpret as her own thoughts and then act upon it. This is how deep this thing gets when you're talking about genes and genetics and the exchanging of genes and genetics, which we did touch upon in the last class. We're talking about rape victims and so on and so forth. And how sometimes, as I say, the sacredness around sex gets lost in this vile act overstood, and then maybe they become overly sexual, sleeping with different people or whatever. Is it her, or is it the pervert inside her who carried out this act, anti-natural act, or unnatural act, overstood, that now is expressing themselves within that person, because the person now thinks it's their thoughts and not this other entity now, male genes inside them. So this is why we have to, we're now starting to uncover the world of darkness, aren't we? You understand? Whether that's the world of submatter, what people call subatomic energy. Now we're delving into the spiritual of what is taking place inside our genetics, and why sex was considered sacred. So you can see the propagation of certain moves towards, let's say, us being less moral around sexual preferences has a positive angle to it, because you want those gatekeepers, you understand, to be able to manifest themselves, because they're needed for the race. Understood? And when we get into maybe the other class, we'll talk about two significant ones, Ankh en Atun, or they call Ankhenaten, and Nafar Tweetweet, or Nefertiti, they call Nefertiti. These were gatekeepers, understood, around the time with Tut Ankh Amun. And we get into that in more detail in the next class. And so obviously they could be anybody in this society now, with the genes being scrambled, mixed up, etc., etc. You don't know who's who. So you need a culture that at least understands or is accepting. It's not a case of, boy, because I read that in the Bible, don't do this, but that's now fueled my thinking towards that, you understand, or not the case may be. So, and then when you're talking about trans people, then it's an extreme of that same defect, you understand. So obviously there are different levels of degrees, but with a trans person, it's same level. And how you equalize that is within a society, so people are not discriminated against, is how you work through. But in doing that, you can't impinge upon the rights of other people in that group. So anybody talking about this cis woman and all this guy, she's a cis woman, to be honest, it's offensive in the sense of this. There is a hierarchy in nature's system, and the reality is that women are the progenitors and the god of life here on the planet Earth. That's that. And because you've been born with a certain defect, which clearly may be horrible, you can't reduce the importance of that person to give you what you perceive to be equal rights. If a man or technology reaches to a point where scientists are going to put a womb inside of a man in order to give equal rights to that individual, there's going to be a serious kickback by nature's own immune system. So you think coronavirus is a problem? If scientists seek to go down that direction, nature, in establishing and maintaining its rules, will act. We saw that to be the case. They tell you that AIDS, isn't it, came from a monkey. No, it didn't come from a monkey. It came from them trying to put simian genes inside black women to create super soldiers. And nature kicked back and gave them what we call HIV. So the rules are the rules, and they're not there to be messed with or changed. And when human beings do that, there's always consequences in that regard. So that was a bit of a long answer, but as I say, I think it sets us up for what we need to talk about in the next class. Any other questions?
Yes, there's another question from Valerie. And the question is, which of the master teacher's new books explains the origin of the Sabaic language, please? It says that the general wiki research only goes to Afro-Asiatic languages.
So Language of Time, she wants the history, so Language of Time. And the other one is called, which name is, me for a second, bear with me. Ancient Signs of Speech. So Language of Time, I think it's got a bit more of a comprehensive introduction on the language, and not so it's not only its earthly origin, but its link into, as I say, the connection with the Sirius or Sirius star constellation, and also Hatat She'et Sutuk, who was a female pharaoh. They call her Hatshepsut. But a female pharaoh, interesting enough, also a gatekeeper, who you see, she's depicted as a female, but she wears the postiche. It's a beard, yeah, made from horse's hair, symbolizing a particular order. And the reason why they tie her in to the language, because when she ruled, she was one of the most successful female rulers of ancient Tamaray, but she basically brought back the Sabaic language, or the speaking of the language, into society, because there was a lot of wars and various things taking place to keep Europeans out of Africa into Europe, but she created a number of years of peace, full rulership, and she brought back the language, which basically helped us reconnect with our ancestors. So you want language of time in the main, and also ancient signs of speech, those two words. Any other questions?
No further questions.
No further questions. Okay, so I'm just gonna finish on a couple more slides, and then next class, I'm gonna get into the gatekeepers, golden children, and walk through. I want to spend some time walking through, because there was a question asked about protection. We gave an answer, but there's more to it that we need to kind of go through in that time. So basically, yeah, we were looking at that gateway opens at 3 a.m. And so people cross over. Now, it can be a situation whereby these certain adverse spiritual forces can cross over, I suppose, in breach of the rules as well. So they can get across. So adverse forces can make their way across at different times. And things like the Hadron Collider, as you know, where they were trying to split some of these subatomic particles, can tear holes in the fabric of space and time, and force, as I say, the barriers to break between certain dimensions, and that can also allow some of these adverse forces to cross over. But it's a way in which, as I say, at that particular time, we would cross over that threshold from the physical into the etheric or spiritual world at 3 a.m. when that gateway opens. Now, some people get trapped here as well because they may have died in traumatic circumstances, and some people don't know they're dead. Or that circumstance was so traumatic they can be trapped in a loop, as I say, that forces them to keep living that situation or whatever. And so, as I say, there can be different reasons why these lower entry forces may find themselves here. So us learning as Sabaeans not to be fearful of death, and learn about what takes place in the rituals and so on and so forth around death, is always a kind of, and preparing for it, life insurance and different things, practical measures that can be taken, having a will, making sure your affairs, who's going to deal with them, who can I trust in that situation, having discussions with family about what you want in terms of your death, because some people think, oh, it's morbid, I don't want to talk about it, blah, blah, blah. You try to talk about it with your partner, I don't want to think about you dying, and so on and so forth. And so you maybe get past those conversations until you're of old age. But you need to make those things clear and start preparing and planning for your death. You're going to die, unless you, in some instances, are able to defeat that by transferring your soul and consciousness into another body before the point of death, which is a skill and an ability that can be mastered. But for the majority of people, you need to plan what's going to happen to and even in that situation, you want to plan what is going to happen with my physical body, because I'm not leaving it around for lower forces to use physically for whatever nefarious purposes. So I want the physicality of it to be destroyed, but the ritual I need to make sure that ritual is right, so that I end up in the right place, and that people know, as I say, how to assist me by directing their positive energy to help assist with my ascension when I'm gone. And you need to know that when you're gone, that you've left certain things in place that are not going to really keep you tied here in that sense. And we mentioned a few of these things before. You know, if you haven't put money aside, or you didn't have a proper life insurance policy, and you know how black people are. You know, they're having to find money for your funeral. You know, they love you, but they hate you at the same time. You understand? So my point is unless you're dying in some circumstances that you weren't able to plan for, or whatever the case would be, then you have to think about how you put these things in place. Otherwise, you're going to end up, in a lot of instances, you know, certainly if you're a Sabaean on this call, you're going to end up in a situation where people bury you according to the religion that they like. Yeah, because when people pass, everybody knew the person best. You understand? You see all the commotion that it causes. But if you set it out in writing or whatever form, you've had a meeting, a one-off, hey, this is where it's going to be. You say you contact to do the ritual, whatever. You know, no disrespect, but I don't want some white Catholic priest, you know what I mean, doing my ritual for me, because he's vibrating on a level just lower than me, so actually help me with my ascension. He's vibrating on a lower level, 5 ether, than I'm going to. I'm not trying to go that direction. I want to go in the other direction. So make sure I want this person to do the ritual. You can't find that person. This is who you contact, so on and so forth. You have to be that specific. What do I want to be dressed in? What are this? What are that? Etc. Etc. And if you've got good people around you, maybe they're going to be able to make good decisions around that, but you want to make sure nobody knows what you want but you. You understand? So I'm part of all of that transition ritual as well. It's about, okay, oh, he liked this or she liked that. It's building things that you like so that you're comfortable. That is the main thing. You know, you're not dying in fear, even in circumstances which are tragic. That's one of the ways in which you protect yourself. You know, importantly now, as we've expressed in this class, the importance even of positive thinking in that situation, that you can't be afraid of loss. Now, it's a bit different. If I've left 200,000, 300,000, 400,000 against a life insurance policy, you know what I mean? I'm not saying people are not going to be hurt when I go, but it's a case of, hey, they'll be able to figure it out. You understand? That's very different. Oh, they're going to lose the house if I'm not working. I've not put this in place. I've not put that in place, and creating that stress. If you were in a position where you were dying prematurely, that's going to keep you here. So this is the type of things which Wu-Sabat is saying to you: no, face these things, face these realities, learn about this, learn about what happened. There's some of the things you're not going to know until you die, whether it's true or not. But it's definitely not a case of leaving it unattended to find out now, oh damn, it's too late. All what we believed in overstood, yes? Or what we believed in, we've been tricked. Yeah, that's why they call it adulthood, because you've been hoodwinked, yeah, all this time. In England they say kidulthood, because we were hoodwinked when we were in the hood. Yeah, tricked, yeah, all this time, so that our value, our emotional energy is going to be utilized by forces that have got nothing to do with our race or our ascension pathway. So that's what they're saying to you. Do this for this force, worship these entities, worship this, worship that. You'll get it in the afterlife, only to find out when you get there now, it's all a trick, it was all myth. And you can't even go back and warn your family, because your family's vibrating at such a low rate. You can't guide them because they're not communicating with you. They don't call upon you because they was never taught to. And if they did, or it was presented to them, nah, that's black magic. I'm not dealing with that. Taking offense because it's not Jesus' images, or it's not Muhammad's image. It sounds crazy. You understand? That's one of the things the master points out in this scroll, is that what's amazing is that we prefer myth and legend over facts and reality. As a people, we prefer myth and legend, I think I'm paraphrasing, but myth and mysteries. Myth and mysteries over reality. Yeah, this is something we got to correct. And our story, trust me, our story is more amazing than the fictions that they can dream up. You know, so I think hopefully when we get through part 4, we can convey some of the amazement where you're going to have to say to yourself, who's the master teacher and who the hell are we? No, I mean, I'm not who the hell are we, but maybe who are we? Who are we? Because there's certain patterns and certain things in nature and how people have got a real hard energy for us not to succeed. You understand? And I think on that note, if there's no other burning questions, when we get into next week, we're going to...
There is another question.
Oh, there is. Okay, we're going to go through the power of concentration in some detail so you can protect yourself against these lower forces. Yes, last question or last few questions, last set.
It says, this is from Neri. Greetings. Is there a way we can purchase this class on audio to reflect back on it? It's a dynamic class.
No, you don't need to purchase it. So it's on YouTube. It will be on YouTube before the end of the week, so probably around Wednesday or Thursday. So if I'll put the YouTube details on there. I think it's also on our Facebook page. But if I put the YouTube details on there, you can listen to it and reflect back on it on YouTube. If you're not a YouTuber, there are ways to convert YouTube videos into audio if you need to put it on some kind of device or something of that nature. But it'll be on YouTube in its entirety, audio and visual, for your use. And on that, are there any other questions?
No, there are not. There are no further questions.
There we go. So YouTube, just search All Eyes on Egypt, Midlands and the North, and you can, as I say, you'll find the channel there, and this class should be there, as I say, probably Wednesday or Thursday of this coming week. And so next class is on the 16th of August. There's 2 ways to register, so make sure you're registered, because there's a part 1 set of classes, so make sure, most of you probably have the link for that, obviously, because you're on the call. But there's also a part 2 registration. So for part 2 is a different link. So just make sure you register for that if you haven't done already. Most people have, but if you're not, just make sure you don't miss the class in 2 weeks' time, 16th of August. So we'll finish reflection and projection and jump into a couple of topics from Real Trinity in there as well. So as I say, probably gone on. Probably let's get a little bit further into the class, but it's not a problem. We'll hit the ground running with a lesser introduction for the next time. So we're starting off with concentration, and we'll end up talking about golden children. So we'll tie those 2 things in together. So definitely not one to be missed for a proper conclusion to what we've been talking about for the first 3 parts onto the final part, which is part 4. Okay, so on that note, if there are no other questions, thank you all for who join us, say, on the Zoom platform and on Facebook. So much appreciated, and thank you for staying on for an extra 40 minutes for us today. So wish you, want you and wish positive energy for you in all your activities over the coming weeks. And if you're able to join us, come back on the 16th on the same platform, same time, 1 o'clock till 4:30 p.m. And that is GMT +1. Okay, thank you all, and take and give care.